Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Nightmare Narratives. I can picture some of you already in bed, maybe some of you just getting home from work. Wherever you are, whatever time it is, I'm glad you're here. If this helps you relax or sleep, please like and subscribe. It means a lot. Now let's get you comfortable, and I'll tell you tonight's story. My name is Patricia Stormcrow, but everyone calls me Rock Spider. I've been a park ranger at Seneca Rocks for 14 years now. That's a long time to spend looking up at those tall, white stone cliffs that rise 900 feet into the West Virginia sky. People come from all over the world to climb these rocks. They call it some of the best climbing on the East Coast. I should know. I used to be one of them. Before I became a ranger, I was a professional climber. That was before the accident that killed my whole team. That was before I learned that some things are better left alone. But I'm getting ahead of myself. It was August 1989, and the climbing season was at its peak. Every weekend, cars packed the parking lot. Climbers would get up before dawn, load their ropes and gear, and head up the trails to challenge the rock. Most of them were good people, respectful, careful, following the rules. They'd wave when they saw me making my rounds, ask about weather conditions, thank me for keeping the trails clean. I loved that job. After losing my team on a climb in Colorado 3 years earlier, working as a ranger felt like a way to give back. I could use my climbing skills to help people, to teach them to be safe on the rock. I'd done over 500 rescues in my time there. Broken bones, stuck climbers, equipment failures. I'd seen it all. Or so I thought. The thing about Seneca Rocks is that it's not just any old cliff. The Seneca people who lived here first called it sacred. They had stories about the rocks, legends passed down for hundreds of years. Old Joseph Windwalker, who worked at the visitor center, would tell tourists about the spirits that lived in the stone, how the rocks demanded respect, how they could be dangerous to those who didn't listen. I always thought those were just stories to make the tourists more careful. Something to make them thin. Think twice before taking stupid risks. I wish I'd listened more carefully. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Tuesday morning in late August. I was doing my usual safety check of the most popular climbing routes. Nelson Rocks, the Gun Site, Old Man's Route. I'd climbed them all hundreds of times. I knew every handhold, every crack, every place where the rock changed color. But that morning, something was different. On Old Man's Route, there was a handhold that hadn't been there before. Not a new chip in the rock or a piece that had broken off, a completely new grip, carved deep into the white quartzite like it had always been there. But I knew it hadn't. I'd climbed that exact spot the week before. I stood there for 10 minutes, staring at that hold. Quartzite doesn't change. It's been the same for millions of years. The only way to alter it is with heavy machinery or explosives. But there it was. A perfect pocket for your fingers, right where a climber would need it most. I marked it in my logbook and moved on. Probably just my memory playing tricks on me. 14 years of looking at the same rocks could make you see things that weren't there. But that night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that hold, the way it was positioned so perfectly. The way the rock around it looked worn, like hands had been gripping it for years. The next morning, I got a call on my radio. Rock Spider, we've got a situation on the south face. Climber took a fall, but his partner can't find him anywhere. I grabbed my rescue gear and hiked out to the base of the cliff. 2 climbers stood there, a man and woman in their 30s, both experienced from the look of their equipment. "He was right above me," the woman said, her voice shaking, maybe 30 feet up. I heard him yell, then silence. When I looked up, he was gone. I studied the cliff face above us. It was a route I knew well. No ledges where someone could get stuck, no hidden cracks to fall into. If someone fell, they'd either be hanging on their rope or they'd be at the bottom. But there was no one at the bottom, and no one hanging above us. "Are you sure he didn't rappel down another way?" I asked. "His gear is still up there," the man said, pointing. "Look." I got out my binoculars and scanned the rock. Sure enough, about 30 feet up, I could see a helmet wedged into a crack. Not sitting on a ledge or caught on a protrusion, wedged deep into the rock itself, like the stone had somehow closed around it. That was impossible. Rock doesn't move. Rock doesn't grab things and pull them in. But the helmet was there, buried 6 inches deep in solid quartzite. I called for backup and started climbing up to investigate. The route was easy for me. I could practically walk up those holds with my eyes closed. But as I got closer to where the helmet was stuck, something felt wrong. The rock was warm. Not sun warm, but body warm, like something alive was breathing underneath the surface. And when I touched it, I could swear I felt it move slightly, like skin over muscle. The helmet belonged to Marcus Chen, according to the ID inside. It was a good helmet, the kind that could take serious impact. But it wasn't cracked or dented. It looked like it had been carefully placed into the rock, then the stone had grown around it. I tried to pull it out, but it wouldn't budge. It was part of the rock now. "Find anything?" the woman called up from below. "Yeah," I called back, "but I don't understand it." I took photos and measurements, then rappelled back down. The 2 climbers were pale and shaken. They'd been climbing for 15 years, they told me. Never seen anything like this. "Maybe he fell and the helmet bounced up there somehow," the man suggested, but he didn't sound convinced. We searched the base of the cliff for 2 hours. No body, no blood, no sign that anyone had hit the ground. Marcus Chen had simply vanished, leaving only his helmet embedded in solid rock. I filed my report that evening, writing it up as a standard missing person case. Equipment failure, possible fall with body carried away by animals. It happened sometimes in the wilderness. People disappeared and were never found. But I couldn't stop thinking about that warm rock, the way it had felt almost soft under my fingers. 3 days later, it happened again. This time, it was a solo climber named Janet Rodriguez, experienced local who'd been climbing Seneca for 20 years. Her car was in the parking lot, her approach shoes at the base of West Face Route. But Janet was nowhere to be found. I climbed the route myself, looking for clues. Halfway up, I found her chalk bag. Like the helmet, it was embedded in the rock. But this time, I could see finger marks around it in the stone, as if someone had pressed their hands into soft clay, then the clay had hardened. But quartzite isn't clay. Quartzite is one of the hardest rocks on Earth. I sat there on my ledge, staring at those handprints. They were Janet's size, Janet's shape. I could even see the scar on the index finger where she'd cut herself on a piece of gear years ago. But the prints were pushed into stone that should have been impossible to mark. That's when I noticed the pictographs. They were faded and old, carved into the rock face about 10 feet to my right. I'd never seen them before, but they looked like they'd been there forever. The images showed stick figures climbing up towards something at the top of the cliff. But the thing at the top wasn't human. It was large and round, with a mouth full of teeth, and the stick figures weren't climbing up to it. They were being pulled up, stretched and distorted, as if the thing was eating them. I took pictures and called Joseph Windwalker as soon as I got back to my truck. "Joe, I need to ask you about the old stories, the legends about Seneca rocks." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "What kind of stories, Patricia?" "The ones about spirits in the rock, about the cliffs being dangerous." Another pause. "Meet me at my house tonight. This isn't something to discuss over the radio." Joseph's house was a small cabin about 5 miles from the park. He was 83 years old, a member of the Seneca Nation who'd grown up hearing the old stories from his grandmother. When I showed him the pictures of the pictographs, his face went gray. "Those are the hungry stones," he said quietly. "My grandmother told me about them when I was a boy. She said they were warnings." "Warnings about what?" "About the thing that lives in the rock, the thing that feeds on climbers." I almost laughed. Almost. But then I thought about Marcus Chen's helmet embedded in solid stone, about Janet Rodriguez's handprints pressed into quartzite. "Tell me," I said. Joseph made tea and we sat at his kitchen table while he talked. According to the old stories, Seneca Rocks wasn't a natural formation. It was a creature, something ancient and hungry that had taken the shape of stone to hide itself. For centuries it had slept, looking like nothing more than a cliff. But sometimes, when there was enough activity on its surface, It would wake up, and when it woke up, it would feed. The climbers, Joseph said, they think they're climbing on rock, but they're actually climbing on the creature's back. And when it gets hungry enough, it opens its mouth and pulls them in. That's impossible, I said. But even as I said it, I was thinking about the warm stone under my fingers, the way the rock had seemed to move. Is it? Joseph asked. You've seen the signs, the handprints in stone, the gear that gets absorbed. How else do you explain it? I didn't have an answer for that. The next morning, I hiked out to the rocks before dawn. I needed to see for myself to prove that what Joseph had told me was just an old story. Rocks don't live. Rocks don't eat people. There had to be a rational explanation. But as the sun came up and lit the cliff face, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The rock was moving. Not quickly, not obviously, but if you watched carefully, you could see it. The surface was rippling slightly, like water with a gentle current. Handholds were shifting position, opening and closing like sleepy eyes. The whole cliff face was alive. I stood there for an hour, watching in fascination and horror. The movement was so slow that if you weren't looking for it, you'd never notice. But once you saw it, you couldn't unsee it. The entire 900-foot cliff was one massive creature, disguised as stone, and it was waking up. Over the next week, 3 more climbers disappeared. Each time we found pieces of their gear embedded in the rock. A carabiner here, a rope there, a climbing shoe pushed deep into stone, but never the climbers themselves. I tried to convince my supervisor to close the climbing area, but I couldn't explain why without sounding crazy. The rock is alive and eating people wasn't going to go over well with the National Park Service. So I started warning climbers myself, telling them about loose rock, about dangerous conditions. Most of them listened and went somewhere else, but some were determined to climb Seneca no matter what, like the group from Virginia Tech, 4 college students who'd been planning this trip for months. They were good climbers, experienced and careful, but they weren't going to let some paranoid ranger ruin their weekend. I watched them start up Old Man's Route that Saturday morning, and I knew I was about to witness something terrible. The first 3 made it up without problems. They were climbing with ropes, moving carefully, taking their time. But when the 4th student, a kid named Tommy, started up behind them, the rock began to change. I was watching through binoculars from the parking lot. At first, it just looked like Tommy was having trouble finding holds. He'd reach for one spot, then move his hand to another. But as I watched more carefully, I realized the holds were moving. The creature was repositioning them, leading Tommy away from the safe route. "No," I whispered, but there was nothing I could do from so far away. Tommy followed the false holds, not realizing he was being led into a trap. His friends above him were shouting encouragement, telling him he was doing great. They couldn't see what I could see, that the rock face was slowly forming into the shape of a mouth. When Tommy reached what he thought was a good rest spot, the rock closed around him. It happened fast, but not so fast that I couldn't see every detail. The stone flowed like thick honey, wrapping around Tommy's legs, then his waist, then his chest. He had time to scream once before the rock covered his face. His friends above thought he'd fallen. They spent 20 minutes yelling for him, looking down the cliff face, setting up a rescue system. But Tommy wasn't falling. He was being digested, pulled slowly into the creature's body. By the time I got rescue teams to the base of the cliff, there was nothing left but a smooth patch of rock where Tommy had been. His friends were hysterical, insisting he'd been right there a minute ago, but the stone showed no sign that anyone had ever touched it. That night, I couldn't stand it anymore. I drove back to Joseph's house. "It's getting stronger," I told him, "more active. And I think it's because of all the climbing activity. We're feeding it." Joseph nodded grimly. "My grandmother said the same thing. The more people who climb on it, the hungrier it gets. And the hungrier it gets, the more active it becomes. How do we stop it? The old stories say there's a way, a covenant between the creature and the Seneca people. If the proper rituals are performed, The creature will accept offerings instead of hunting randomly. What kind of offerings? Tobacco, sage, sometimes blood. He looked at me seriously. But the ritual has to be done by someone the Kriau tour recognizes as worthy. Someone who understands both worlds, the world of climbers and the world of the rock. I knew what he was suggesting, and I knew he was right. I was probably the only person who could do it. But that meant going up there, onto the creature's back, while it was awake and hungry. That meant becoming bait. I spent the next day preparing. Joseph gave me tobacco and sage from his garden, along with a small obsidian knife that had belonged to his grandmother. He taught me the words I would need to say, the gestures that might convince the creature to listen instead of just eating me. Remember, he said, this thing is old and intelligent. It's not just a mindless monster. It can be reasoned with if you approach it with respect. I waited until after sunset to make my approach. The creature was most active at night when there were no witnesses to see the rock moving. If I was going to make contact, it had to be when it was fully awake. The trail to the base of the cliff had never seemed longer. Every shadow looked like something watching me. Every sound in the forest made me jump. But I kept walking, carrying my climbing gear and Joseph's ritual items. At the base of the cliff, I could see the creature clearly in the moonlight. The rock face was undulating slowly, like a massive chest breathing. Handholds opened and closed in patterns that almost looked like communication. It knew I was there. I laid out the tobacco and sage at the base of the cliff, then lit them with a match. The smoke rose straight up in the still air, and I spoke the words Joseph had taught me. Ancient One, I come to speak with you. I come with respect, with offerings, with a proposal. The rock went still. No more breathing, no more moving holds. It was listening. I started climbing. It was the strangest climb of my life. The holds were there when I needed them, but they felt alive under my fingers. Warm and slightly soft, like climbing on skin instead of stone. The creature was letting me up, but I could feel its attention on every move I made. 50 feet, up, a mouth opened in the rock face beside me. Not a crack or a fissure, but an actual mouth with teeth. It was easily large enough to swallow me whole, and it stretched open as I climbed past. I could feel hot breath coming from inside, smell the scent of partially digested climbing gear. I know what you are, I said to the mouth. I know you're hungry, but there's a better way. More mouths opened along the route above me. Dozens of them, all different sizes. Some were small enough to grab an arm or leg. Others could take half my body. The creature was showing me its power, demonstrating how easily it could end this conversation. I kept climbing and kept talking. The old people, the Seneca, they had an agreement with you. Regular offerings in exchange for safe passage. That deal can work again. At 100 feet up, the rock began to close around my legs. Not aggressively, but firmly. A warning. I could feel the stone growing warm, beginning the digestion process. Wait, I said, and pulled out Joseph's obsidian knife. I cut a line across my palm, deep enough to produce blood. Then I pressed my bleeding hand against the creature's surface and spoke the ritual words Joseph had taught me. I offer this freely, in the old way, as a sign of good faith between our peoples. The pressure around my legs eased. The creature was tasting my blood, considering my offer. For several minutes, we stayed like that. Me clinging to the rock face with one bleeding hand pressed against living stone. I could feel something vast and alien examining me, weighing my sincerity, deciding whether I could be trusted. Finally, the rock began to change. Instead of mouths and teeth, the surface formed patterns, spirals and lines that looked almost like writing. The creature was trying to communicate in return. I studied the patterns, trying to understand. Some looked familiar from the picto, graphs I'd seen. Others were completely alien, but gradually I began to make sense of them. The creature was telling me its story. It had been asleep for hundreds of years, dreaming stone dreams in the earth. But the vibrations from all the climbers, the metal gear scraping against its surface, the constant activity, all of that had slowly awakened it. and when it woke up, it was starving. It didn't want to hurt people, but it was so hungry, and the climbers were right there, warm and alive and pressing themselves against its surface. How could it resist? But yes, it remembered the old agreement with the Seneca people, regular offerings in exchange for restraint. It could work with that. "Once a month," I said. "Tobacco, sage, and a blood offering. I'll make sure it happens. But you have to stop hunting the climbers." The pattern shifted, showing agreement. But there was a condition. I had to stay. Not forever, but until the creature was sure the agreement would be honored. I would be its guarantee, its insurance policy. If the offerings stopped coming, it would have me as payment. I looked down at the ground, 100 feet below. Then I looked up at the top of the cliff, still 800 feet above. Either direction was a long way to fall. But I thought about Tommy, about Marcus and Janet, and all the others who had disappeared. I thought about the climbers who would come here in the future, trusting that the rock would keep them safe. "Okay," I said, "I'll stay." The creature's surface formed what might have been a smile. I spent 3 days on that cliff face, held gently but firmly by living stone. The creature kept me warm and even provided water, moisture that seeped from its surface and tasted like mountain springs. During the day, I watched confused search teams looking for me at the base of the cliff. At night, I watched the stars and felt the ancient intelligence beneath me, dreaming its slow, geological dreams. On the third night, Joseph Windwalker appeared at the base of the cliff with a group of Seneca elders. They performed the full ceremony: tobacco, sage, cornmeal, and a blood offering from each person present. The smoke rose up around me, carrying prayers and promises. When it was done, the rock gently lowered me to the ground. The official report said I'd been injured in a climbing accident and suffered temporary amnesia. The Park Service accepted that explanation mainly because they didn't want to dig deeper into why so many climbers had been disappearing from Seneca Rocks. The climbing area remained open, but with new restrictions. Certain routes were marked as geologically unstable and closed to the public. Others required special permits that were rarely granted. Climbing activity dropped to a fraction of what it had been. And once a month, on the night of the new moon, Joseph and I hike out to the base of the cliff with our offerings. We burn tobacco and sage, spill blood on the stone, and renew the ancient covenant between human and creature. The disappearances stopped. But late at night, when I'm alone in my ranger cabin, I sometimes hear things that make me remember that we're not dealing with ordinary rock. Sounds like breathing coming from the direction of the cliff. Sounds like something vast and patient, waiting in the darkness. The creature kept its bargain, but it's still there. Still hungry, still very much alive. I've started checking other climbing areas around the country, looking for similar patterns. Unexplained disappearances. Gear found embedded in stone. Warm rock faces that seem to move when nobody's looking. Because if there's one creature like this, there might be others. Ancient things that have learned to hide in plain sight, disguised as the landscapes we love to explore. So when you're out there climbing, pay attention to the rock. Notice if it feels warmer than it should. Watch for holds that seem to shift position. And if you see any gear embedded in stone, where it shouldn't be able to go, get off that cliff immediately. Some mountains are just stone and earth, but others are something else entirely. And they're always watching, always waiting, always a little bit hungry. My name is Patricia Stormcrow, and for 27 years now I've been keeping a promise to something that should not exist. Every month, I feed the thing that lives in Seneca Rocks, and every month it lets our climbers go home alive. But the covenant is only as strong as the people who honor it. When I'm gone, someone else will need to take my place. Someone else will need to keep the hungry stones fed. The question is, will you believe this story enough to help when the time comes? Or will you assume it's just another tall tale from an old ranger who's spent too many years alone in the mountains? I hope, for all our sakes, that you choose to believe. My name is Margaret Ironwolf, but everyone calls me Maggie. I've been a ranger in these West Virginia mountains for 13 years now. My dad was German, my mom Cherokee, and they both taught me that the wilderness has its own rules. You respect them, or you get hurt. Dolly Sods isn't like most places. It sits up high in the Monongahela National Forest, covered in bogs and stunted trees that look like they're trying to hide from something. The Cherokee called this place the land that weeps, and after what happened here, I know why. I work alone most of the time. That's how I like it. Just me, my radio, and miles of empty trails. People think being alone up here would scare a woman, but I know these mountains better than my own backyard. Every rock, every stream, every deer path. 5 years ago, my daughter Emma died in a hiking accident. She was only 12. Fell down a cliff while we were exploring a new trail together. I blamed myself for months, still do, some days. That's probably why I took the solo patrol job. Being around other people's kids hurt too much. September 1986 was when everything changed. The weather had been strange all month. Thick fog rolling in when it should have been clear, mist hanging around even on sunny days. The animals were acting weird too. Deer wouldn't cross certain areas. Birds went quiet in spots where they should have been singing. I should have known something was wrong. In 13 years of ranging, I'd never seen the wilderness act like that. But grief makes you stupid sometimes. Makes you miss the signs that are right in front of your face. The first call came in on a Tuesday morning. A family camping near the North Fork had heard a woman crying for help during the night. When they went looking with flashlights, they couldn't find anyone. The husband wanted us to send a search team. Probably just an owl, I told them over too. He radio. Screech owls can sound like people sometimes. But the wife got back on the radio. Her voice was shaking. Ma'am, I know what an owl sounds like. This was a woman calling for her babies. She kept saying, "Help me find my babies," over and over. I promised to check it out. That was my job after all. Even if it turned out to be nothing, I had to make sure no one was actually lost up there. I packed my gear and headed out that afternoon. My backpack had everything I needed for a couple days. Sleeping bag, food, first aid kit, emergency beacon, and my radio. I also carried rope, flares, and extra batteries. If someone was really lost up there, I'd find them. The trail to North Fork cuts through the heart of Dolly Sods. You walk for miles across these weird flat areas covered in sphagnum moss and cranberry bushes. No big trees, just little ones bent over like old men. On a clear day, you can see for miles. But that day, fog kept rolling through in thick patches. I'd been walking for about 2 hours when I heard it. Faint at first, carried on the wind. A woman's voice, crying. Not screaming in pain, but the deep, hopeless crying that comes from losing something you can't get back. I knew that sound. I'd made it myself plenty of times after Emma died. I stopped walking and listened hard. The crying seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. When I tried to follow it, the sound moved, always just out of reach, always pulling me deeper into the fog. "Hello?" I called out. "This is Park Ranger Ironwolf. If you can hear me, stay where you are and keep making noise." The crying stopped. The fog got thicker. And for just a second, I could have sworn I smelled something strange, like flowers and old earth mixed together, like a funeral. I set up my radio and called the base station. "This is Ranger Ironwolf at North Fork Sector. I'm hearing the reported sound. It's beginning grid search pattern." The radio crackled back. "Copy that, Ironwolf. Weather Service says heavy fog expected to continue through tomorrow. Be careful out there." I started my search the way I'd been trained. Walk in straight lines, mark your path, call out every few minutes. If someone was lost, they'd hear me eventually. If they were hurt, they might not be able to answer back. But as I walked, things felt wrong. The fog moved in ways that didn't make sense. Instead of drifting with the wind, it seemed to flow around me like water. And it was too quiet. No insects buzzing, no birds calling, no small animals rustling in the bushes. After an hour of searching, I found something that made my skin crawl. In a patch of soft mud near a stream, there were footprints, small ones, like they belonged to children. But they were barefoot, and what kid would be running around barefoot in September? I knelt down to get a better look. The prints were clear and fresh. 2 different sizes, maybe a 6-year-old and an 8-year-old. They led away from the stream toward a thick patch of fog. I followed them, calling out as I went. "Hello? Kids, if you're out there, this is a park ranger. Your parents are looking for you." The footprints went on for about 20 feet, then just stopped. Not like the kids had stepped onto hard ground where they wouldn't leave tracks. They just ended, like the children had disappeared into thin air. I stood there staring at the last footprint, trying to make sense of it. That's when I heard the crying again. But this time, it was different, closer, and there were words mixed in with the sobs. "My babies. Where are my babies? Someone help me find my babies." The voice came from right behind me. I spun around, my hand moving to the pepper spray on my belt. There was nothing there but fog, but I could smell that funeral flower smell again, stronger now. "Ma'am, I'm a park ranger," I called out. "If you're lost, I can help you. Just keep talking so I can find you." "Find my babies," the voice said. It sounded like it was C, foaming from inside my own head now. "Help me find my babies." That's when I saw her, just for a second, through a gap in the fog. A woman in a white dress standing about 30 feet away. Her long black hair hung down around her face, and she was reaching out toward me like she was begging. I blinked and she was gone. My radio crackled to life. Another camper calling in. "We can hear that woman again. She's crying somewhere near Beaver Dam Trail, about 2 miles from where the first family heard her." I looked at my watch. It would take at least an hour to hike 2 miles from where I was standing. There was no way the same woman could be in both places, unless there were 2 lost people, or unless... I shook my head. No, there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe the fog was playing tricks with sound, making voices carry farther than they should. Maybe it was echoing off the rocks in weird ways. But as I packed up my gear to head toward Beaver Dam Trail, I kept thinking about those footprints, about the way they just stopped, about the woman in white who had appeared and disappeared like smoke, and about the smell of funeral flowers in a place where no flowers grew. I'd been a ranger for 13 years. I'd seen bear attacks, lightning strikes, people lost for days in the wilderness. I thought I'd seen everything these mountains could throw at me. I was wrong. The hike to Beaver Dam Trail took me through the deepest part of Dolly Sods. The fog was so thick I could barely see 10 feet ahead. I had to use my compass to stay on track, checking it every few minutes to make sure I wasn't walking in circles. Halfway there, I found them. A family of 4 from Virginia, all huddled together near a big rock. The parents looked scared, and their 2 kids were crying. "Thank God," the father said when he saw me. "We've been hearing this woman all night. She keeps walking around at our campsite, crying for her children. But every time we look, there's nobody there." "When did it start?" I asked, pulling out my notepad. "Around midnight," the mother said. She was holding her daughter tight. "At first we thought it was just the wind. But then we heard her talking, asking for help, begging someone to bring back her babies." The little girl looked up at me with big, scared eyes. "She touched my tent," she whispered. I felt her hand through the fabric. It was so cold. I checked their campsite. Sure enough, there were handprints on the outside of their tent. But they weren't normal handprints. They looked old somehow, like they'd been pressed into the fabric a long time ago and just now showed up. "Pack up your stuff," I told them. "I'm escorting you back to the main trail." As we walked, the father told me more. The strangest thing was, she seemed to know about our kids. She kept saying their names, Sarah and Tommy, but we never told anyone their names. We just got here yesterday. My blood went cold. I looked at the 2 children walking ahead of us. Sarah looked about 6, Tommy maybe 8, the same ages as those footprints I'd found by the stream. We made it back to the main trail without any more incidents. I radioed for another ranger to come pick up the family and drive them out of the forest. As they left, the mother grabbed my arm. "Be careful out there," she said. "Whatever that thing is, it's not human, and it's looking for something." After they left, I should have hiked back to base, should have filed my report and let the day shift handle any other calls. But I couldn't stop thinking about those footprints, about the woman in white, about the way she'd said the children's names. Instead, I headed back into the wilderness. If someone was really out there, lost, hurt, or worse, I needed to find them. That's when things got bad. I was following an old deer trail when I heard children laughing. Happy sounds like kids playing tag or hide and seek. It should have been a relief after all the crying and fear, but something about it made my skin crawl. I followed the laughter through a thick patch of pine trees. It led me to a small clearing I'd never seen before, even though I'd been ranging these trails for years. In the center of the clearing there was an old fire pit, but not the kind campers make. This one was built from stones arranged in a careful circle with symbols scratched into some of them. Around the fire pit, someone had arranged children's toys. A teddy bear with one eye missing, a wooden doll with carved hair, a small leather ball. But these weren't modern toys. They looked old, really old, like they'd been sitting there for decades. The laughter was coming from the toys. I stood there staring, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. That's when I noticed the bones. Small ones, scattered around the edge of the clearing. They looked human. My hands shook as I reached for my radio. "Base, this is Iron Wolf. I need a crime scene team at my location immediately. I've found something." But before I could give my coordinates, the radio went dead. Not static, not interference, just silence. The laughter stopped too. Everything went quiet except for the sound of my own breathing. Then I heard footsteps behind me. Slow, careful steps, like someone trying not to make noise. I turned around, my hand on my pepper spray. The woman in white was standing at the edge of the clearing, but now I could see her clearly. Her dress was old-fashioned, like something from 100 years ago. Her feet were bare and muddy, and her face was the saddest thing I'd ever seen. Tears ran down her cheeks, but her eyes were empty, like she'd been crying so long she'd forgotten how to stop. "You took them," she said. Her voice was like wind through dead leaves. "You took my babies away." "I didn't take anyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm here to help. Tell me what happened." She stepped closer. With each step, the temperature dropped. I could see my breath now, even though it had been warm a few minutes ago. "The soldiers came," she said. "They brought sickness. My children. She reached out toward me and I saw her hands. They were covered in mud and what looked like old blood. As she got closer, I could smell death on her. Not just funeral flowers anymore. The real thing. "Give them back," she whispered. "Give me back my babies." I backed away, but there was nowhere to go. The trees around the clearing seemed to bend inward, trapping me. The fog rolled in again, thick and cold. "I don't have your children," I said, "but I can help you find them. Tell me their names." She screamed then. Not a human sound, but something that came from deep in the earth. The scream of every mother who ever lost a child, all mixed together into one horrible sound. The trees shook. The old toys scattered. And I ran. I ran through the fog, branches tearing at my clothes, rocks cutting my feet. Behind me, I could hear her following. Not footsteps now, but the sound of something dragging across the ground. Something that had been dead for a very long time. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs gave out. When I finally stopped, I was lost. The fog was so thick I couldn't see my own hands. My compass spun wildly, pointing in every direction at once. My radio was still dead. But I wasn't alone. "Maggie," a voice called softly. A child's voice. "Mommy, where are you?" I knew that voice. It was Emma. My Emma, who'd been dead for 5 years. "Emma," I whispered. "I'm lost, Mommy. I can't find my way home. Will you help me?" Through the fog, I saw a small figure, a girl with brown hair and a pink backpack. The same backpack Emma had been wearing the day she died. Every part of me wanted to run to her, to hold her one more time, to tell her how sorry I was that I couldn't save her. But something was wrong. Emma's feet weren't touching the ground, and her eyes were empty, just like the woman in white. "You're not Emma," I said, tears running down my face. "Emma's dead." "I know," the thing that looked like my daughter said. "But you can be with me now. She wants all the mothers to be together. All the mothers who lost their babies. The fog parted, and I saw them. Dozens of women in old-fashioned clothes, standing in a circle around me. Some looked fresh, like they'd just died. Others were nothing but bones, held together by torn fabric. They were all reaching toward me with empty, pleading eyes. And in the center of them all stood the woman in white. But now I could see her clearly. Her dress wasn't white anymore. It was stained with mud and blood and years of grief. Her hair hung in tangled ropes around her face, and in her arms she carried the bones of 2 small children. "She's been collecting us," said a voice behind me. I turned and saw a woman I recognized, Mrs. Patterson, who'd lost her son in a car accident 3 years ago. She'd moved away after that, but here she was, pale and ghostly. Every mother who's lost a child, she brings us here to help her look for her babies, forever and ever. "She's Cherokee," said another voice, an elderly woman with kind eyes. "Lost her children to smallpox when the soldiers came through in the 1800s. She's been waiting here ever since, calling to the mothers, collecting our grief." The woman in white stepped forward. Up close I could see that she'd once been beautiful. But 200 years of mourning had worn her down to nothing but sorrow. "Join us," she said, holding out her hand. "Help me find them. Help me bring them home." Her touch was ice cold, but it came with something else. A wave of grief so powerful it brought me to my knees. I felt her loss like it was my own. The helplessness of watching your children die. The rage at a world that would let such things happen. The desperate hope that somehow, if you just kept looking, you could bring them back. I understood her. God help me. I understood her completely. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, I'll help you." But as the cold spread up my arm, I heard something else. A voice from deeper in the fog. A man's voice, speaking Cherokee. "Envy Agayudi," he said. "Crying one. It's time to let them go." The woman in white spun around, hissing like an angry cat. Standing at the edge of the circle was Mike Ghosthorse, my backup ranger. He was Cherokee, too, and he wore traditional clothes instead of his uniform. In his hands, he carried sage and tobacco. "The children are at peace," he said calmly. "They've been at peace for 200 years. It's time for you to find peace, too." "No!" she screamed. "They need me. They're lost." "They're not lost," Mike said. He started walking toward us, chanting in Cherokee. "They're waiting for you to let them go. They're waiting for you to stop hurting other mothers." The circle of ghostly women began to fade. Some looked relieved. Others just looked tired. "She feeds on grief," Mike called to me. "Your grief and theirs. The more mothers she collects, the stronger she gets. But grief isn't meant to last forever, Maggie. It's meant to transform into love." I thought about Emma then, not about the day she died, but about all the days she lived. Her laugh when I'd push her on the swings, the way she'd hug me when she was scared, the proud smile on her face when she learned to ride her bike. Emma had been more than her death. She'd been joy and curiosity and love, and she wouldn't want me to spend forever trapped in this place of sorrow. I pulled my hand away from the woman in white. "I love my daughter," I said, "but she's gone, and she wouldn't want me to hurt other people because I miss her." The woman screamed again, but this time it was different. Not just rage, but pain. Real, human pain. Mike began a traditional Cherokee funeral song. As he sang, he scattered tobacco around the clearing. The smell of it mixed with the sage smoke and somehow made the air feel cleaner. "Your children out and they're safe," he told the woman in white. "They don't need you to keep crying for them. They need you to celebrate the life they had, not mourn the life they lost." She looked at the bones in her arms. For the first time in 200 years, she really saw them. Not as lost children who needed finding, but as the remains of babies who had lived and been loved and deserved to rest. Slowly, carefully, she knelt and placed the bones in the center of the clearing. Then she began to sing, a lullaby in Cherokee, soft and sweet. As she sang, her appearance began to change. The mud and blood faded from her dress. Her hair became smooth and black again. The emptiness left her eyes, replaced by the deep sadness of a mother's love. When the song ended, she looked at me one last time. "Tell the mothers," she said. "Tell them to love the living children. Tell them grief is just love with nowhere to go." Then she was gone. The fog lifted. The other women faded away. And I was alone in the clearing with Mike, surrounded by the smell of sage and the sound of birds singing again. Mike and I hiked back to headquarters in silence. It took the rest of the day for me to file my report, the official version, anyway. Lost hiker, false alarm, atmospheric conditions causing acoustic anomalies. No mention of ghosts or Cherokee spirits or 200 years of accumulated grief. But I made some calls, got in touch with the tribal council, told them about the clearing and the bones we'd found there. They came out the next week with proper ceremonies and burial rites. The Cherokee family finally got to rest. The crying stopped after that. No more reports of lost women calling for their children. The animals went back to normal. The fog started behaving like regular fog again. But I changed too. I started visiting Emma's grave every week instead of avoiding it. Started talking to her about the good times instead of just crying about the end. I even put up some of her drawings in my office, the ones where she'd drawn us hiking together, both of us smiling. I kept working solo patrol, but now I carry tobacco and sage in my pack along with the first aid kit. Mike taught me some of the old prayers, the ones that help lost spirits find their way home, just in case. Because the thing is, those mountains are old, really old, and they hold memories the way swamps hold water. Sometimes those memories get stuck, like the Cherokee woman did. Sometimes they need help moving on. People ask me if I believe in ghosts now. I tell them I believe in grief. I believe it can eat you alive if you let it. I believe it can trap you in one terrible moment and make you forget all the good moments that came before. But I also believe in love, the kind that lasts after someone's gone, the kind that wants the best for people, even when it hurts to let them go. Emma's been gone 5 years now. I still miss her every day. But I don't stay awake at night trying to figure out how to bring her back anymore. Instead, I remember how she laughed, how she wasn't afraid of anything, how she made every day brighter just by being in it. That's not grief anymore. That's love. And love doesn't trap you. Love sets you free. I still patrol Dolly Sods alone. Still walk those strange, misty trails where the trees grow sideways and the bog pools reflect more sky than they should. But now I know what to listen for. Not just cries for help, but the difference between someone who's lost and someone who's choosing to stay lost. Because sometimes people need to be found, and sometimes they need to be taught how to stop looking. The Cherokee called this place the land that weeps. But tears can wash things clean if you let them. And sometimes that's exactly what needs to happen. Just don't forget. If you're ever hiking in these mountains and you hear a woman crying in the fog, stop and listen carefully. If she's asking for help, call a ranger. But if she's asking you to help her find her baby, walk away fast. Some kinds of grief are catching, and once they get hold of you, they don't like to let go. My name is David Ashworth, but everybody calls me Bone Crusher. I've been a ranger in the Monongahela National Forest for 16 years now, and let me tell you something. I've seen things that would make your hair turn white, but nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened in the Cranberry Wilderness back in March of 1991. I'm 41 years old, former military police, and I know bones. Sounds weird, right? But when you spend your days tracking poachers and investigating wildlife crimes, you learn to read death like a book. A broken deer leg tells you about a bad shot. Scattered elk bones show you where the wolves fed. Clean cuts on antlers mean someone took a saw to them after the kill. The Cranberry Wilderness is no joke. 47,000 acres of roadless land in West Virginia, where the nearest town is 60 miles of rough mountain road away. When you're out there, you're really out there. Just you, the trees, and whatever's hiding in the shadows between them. March in Cranberry means the snow's melting, and that's when the ground gives up its secrets. Bodies of animals that died in winter start showing up. Old campsites emerge from snowdrifts, and sometimes you find things that make you wish winter had lasted a little longer. That's when I got the call about the bone gardens. Ranger Ashworth? The voice on my radio was shaky, young. This is Tom Phillips. My girlfriend and I were hiking near Cow Pasture Trail and we found something bad. I'd heard fear in people's voices before. Bear encounters, getting lost, broken bones on the trail. But Tom's voice had something else in it, something that made my stomach drop. What kind of something, Tom? Bones, sir. Lots of them. But they're arranged, like someone built something with them, and some of them look human. I told Tom to mark his location and get out of there. Don't touch anything. Don't take pictures. Just get back to your car and wait for me. The drive to Cow Pasture Trail took an hour on those winding mountain roads. Snow was melting everywhere, creating little streams that ran across the asphalt like veins. The radio crackled with static. It always did up here. Cell phones were useless. If something happened, you were on your own. Tom and his girlfriend Sarah were waiting by their beat-up Honda, both looking like they'd seen a ghost. Tom was maybe 22, college kid from Virginia Tech. Sarah kept her arms wrapped around herself, even though it wasn't that cold. It's about half a mile up the trail, Tom said, pointing into the woods, near that old bog area. I knew the spot. Dark water, thick with tangled roots and fallen trees. The kind of place that preserved things. Sometimes hikers found arrowheads there, old bottles. Once somebody found a Civil War canteen, but I had a feeling we weren't dealing with historical artifacts. You two head back to town, I told them. I'll take it from here. The trail was muddy from snowmelt, and my boots squelched with every step. Pine branches dripped steadily like the forest was crying. There's a smell to places where things die, sweet and rotten, but with something else underneath, something older. That smell hit me before I saw anything. Then I came around a bend, and there it was. What Tom had called a bone garden was actually worse than that. Someone had taken bones, lots of them, and built structures, not random piles, but deliberate constructions that looked almost like altars. 3 different sites, each about 20 feet apart. The bones were arranged in perfect circles, with what looked like a shrine in the center of each one. Animal skulls, deer, bear, maybe wolf, were placed at specific points like compass directions. And mixed in with the animal bone were others, longer ones, smoother ones, human bones. I've got forensic training and I know a human femur when I see one. These were old, stained brown by bog water, but definitely human. The kind of bones you find in old battlefields. And this area had seen its share of battles. During the Civil War, Union and Confederate forces had fought all through these mountains. Soldiers died, got buried quick, and sometimes got forgotten. Over the years, I'd found uniform buttons, musket balls, even a few skulls that had worked their way to the surface. But this was different. These bones had been carefully placed. Whoever did this knew anatomy. Each circle had a complete skeleton's worth of bones, just arranged in patterns instead of human form. I pulled out my camera and started documenting everything. That's when things got weird. The first photo looked normal through the viewfinder. But when I looked at the back of the camera, the image was blurry. Not motion blur, something else. Like the bones themselves were moving just a little bit, too fast to see with the naked eye, but slow enough to mess up the camera. I tried again. Same thing. Fresh batteries in the camera that morning, but now the battery indicator was showing empty. What the hell? I muttered and tried to change the batteries. But when I touched the camera, it was hot. Not warm, hot enough to make me jerk my hand back. That's when I noticed the silence. Forests are never really quiet. There's always something. Birds calling, squirrels rustling, insects buzzing. But here, near the bone circles, there was nothing. Even the dripping had stopped. I looked around and realized something else. No animal tracks in the mud. Deer should have been all over this area. New grass growing, fresh water from the snowmelt. But the ground around the bone circles was empty. Like animals went out of their way to avoid this place. I forced myself to move closer to the first circle. The bones were definitely arranged according to some kind of pattern. The skulls faced inward toward the center where someone had willed a small pile of what looked like personal items. Buttons, belt buckles, a few metal objects I couldn't identify. I knelt down to get a better look, being careful not to disturb anything. Crime scene protocol. But as I leaned in, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Marching. The sound of boots hitting the ground in perfect rhythm like soldiers on parade. But there was nobody there. The sound was coming from the trees, maybe 100 yards away, but I couldn't see anything. I stood up fast, hand moving to my sidearm out of reflex. The marching sound kept going for maybe 30 seconds, then faded away. But just before it disappeared completely, I heard something else. Orders being shouted in the distance. Too far away to make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. Military commands. This was getting beyond my expertise. I needed to call state police, maybe the medical examiner. This looked like a crime scene, possibly multiple homicides, definitely involving human remains. But first, I wanted to check the other two circles. The second one was similar to the first, but the bones were arranged differently. Instead of a circle, they formed a straight line, like soldiers standing in formation. And the smell was stronger here. Not just death, but something else, something like gunpowder. The third circle was the worst. The bones weren't just arranged, they were posed. Arm bones positioned like they were holding weapons. Skull facing out toward the trees like it was standing guard. And in the center, instead of personal items, there was a hole in the ground. Fresh dug from the look of the soil. I was backing away from that last circle when I heard my name. Ashworth. Clear as day, like someone was standing right behind me. I spun around, gun drawn, but there was nobody there. Ashworth, you don't belong here. The voice was coming from everywhere and nowhere. Old, tired, but with the kind of authority that made you want to snap to attention. Who's there? I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. This is a crime scene. You need to identify yourself. Silence. Then, just at the edge of my vision, I saw movement. Gray shapes moving between the trees, too far away to make out clearly. But they moved wrong, like they were floating instead of walking. That's when I decided I'd seen enough for one day. Whatever was happening here was beyond a simple wildlife crime investigation. I needed backup, equipment, and probably a priest. I marked the GPS coordinates and got the hell out of there. Back at the ranger station, I called my partner, Lisa Mountain Hawk. Lisa's Cherokee, been with the Forest Service for 8 years, and she knows the old stories better than anyone. If anybody could make sense of bone circles in the woods, it would be her. She arrived an hour later, took one look at my photos, and went pale. Dave, where exactly did you find these? Near the bog by Cow Pasture Trail. Why, you recognize the pattern? She was quiet for a long time, studying the photos. Finally, she looked up at me with eyes that were worried and sad at the same time. These aren't crime scenes, Dave. They're calling circles. Calling what? The dead. Someone's trying to wake up the people buried in these mountains. She pointed to the arrangement in the first photo. See how the bones are positioned? This is old Cherokee magic, but it's being used wrong. Twisted. I'd worked with Lisa long enough to trust her instincts about things like this. She'd grown up hearing stories from her grandmother, stories about the old ways and the old powers. Most of the time, I figured they were just stories. But sometimes, just sometimes, the stories turned out to be true. So, what are we dealing with here? Some kind of wannabe medicine man? Worse. Someone who knows just enough to be dangerous. She tapped the photo of the third circle. This one here? That's not Cherokee. This is something else. Something that uses Cherokee methods, but serves a different purpose. Before I could ask what she meant, my radio crackled. Ranger Ashworth, this is dispatch. We've got another missing hiker report. Female, age 26, was supposed to check in with her boyfriend yesterday. Last known location was Cranberry Wilderness. My stomach dropped. Where in Cranberry? Cow pasture trail area. Lisa and I looked at each other. That was too much of a coincidence. We drove back out there together, this time with full search and rescue equipment. Flashlights, GPS, first aid kit, and both of us carrying weapons. Whatever was happening in those woods, I wasn't taking any chances. The bone circles were exactly where I'd left them, but something had changed. The third circle, the one with the hole in the center, now had something in that hole, something that looked like fabric. Lisa held the flashlight while I got closer. It was a piece of hiking boot. Expensive, recent, and stained with something dark. Dave. Lisa's voice was tight. Look at the bones. The bones in the circle had moved. Not much, but enough to be obvious. Instead of pointing inward, they now pointed toward the trees, toward the deeper parts of the wilderness. Animals don't arrange bones, I said, more to myself than to Lisa. No, they don't, but the dead remember how they used to march. As if summoned by her words, we heard it again, marching in the distance, but this time from multiple directions, at least two groups, maybe more, moving through the forest with military precision. We need to follow those sounds, I said. If there's someone out there, they might have our missing hiker. Lisa grabbed my arm. Dave, listen to me. Those aren't people. Those are soldiers who died in these mountains over 100 years ago. Someone's using those bones to call them back. That's impossible. Is it? You've seen the evidence. You've heard them yourself. I wanted to argue, but she was right. I'd been trying to rationalize what I'd seen, but there was no rational explanation for bones that moved themselves or voices that called my name. We followed the sound of marching deeper into the wilderness. The forest got darker as we went, even though it was still afternoon. The trees grew closer together, and the ground became soft and boggy. This was the kind of place where armies had gotten lost during the war, where desperate men had fought and died far from home. After about 20 minutes, we came to a clearing I'd never seen before. And in that clearing were more bone circles, dozens of them, all arranged in perfect military formation, like a regiment prepared for inspection. And standing between them, solid as life but gray as fog, were the soldiers, Confederate and Union both, still wearing the tattered remains of their uniforms. Some carried muskets, others had swords. All of them were staring at us with empty eye sockets. In the center of the formation stood a man who wasn't a soldier. He was alive, or at least more alive than the others. Tall, thin, wearing modern clothes but covered in mud and what looked like dried blood. In his hands he held bones like they were conducting batons, and at his feet, tied up and gagged, was a young woman in hiking gear. "Welcome, Rangers," the man called out in a voice that carried too well in the still air. "I was wondering when you'd finally make it this far." The dead soldiers turned their heads toward us in perfect unison, and even though they had no eyes, I could feel them watching. "Let her go," I shouted, drawing my weapon. But even as I said it, I knew how stupid that sounded. How do you arrest someone who commands an army of the dead? The man laughed, and the sound echoed strangely in the clearing. "You can call me Morrison. I've been living in these mountains for, 15 years now, learning, practicing. And these fine soldiers have been teaching me about discipline." He gestured to the skeletal warriors around him. Up close, I could see I weren't completely bone. Some still had bits of rotted uniform, pieces of flesh that had been preserved in the bog water, and they all held weapons that should have crumbled to rust decades ago. You see, Rangers, this wilderness is built on a foundation of the unquiet dead. Thousands of men died here during the war, buried quick, forgotten fast. But death has a memory. Lisa stepped forward, and I noticed she'd put away her gun. Instead, she was holding something small in her hand. "You're using Cherokee bone calling, but you're doing it wrong. This isn't how the power works." Morrison's eyes narrowed. The Cherokee way wasn't strong enough. Too much respect for the dead, not enough control over them. I've improved the method. You've corrupted it, Lisa said firmly. And you've trapped these men in their worst moment. They died fighting, so they have to keep fighting. Forever. That's when I understood what I was seeing. These weren't just reanimated corpses. They were soldiers caught in an endless loop of their last battle. Confederate and Union forces, still fighting the same war that killed them over a century ago. And Morrison was using their eternal conflict to power his necromancy. The missing hikers, I said. You've been feeding them to this army. Recruiting them, Morrison corrected. Fresh bones, fresh spirits, fresh soldiers for the cause. Though I have to break them first. The living don't take orders as well as the dead. The bound woman at his feet struggled against her ropes and made muffled sounds through her gag. I could see the terror in her eyes, but something else too. She was trying to tell us something. That's when I noticed the other bone circles had fresh additions. Modern boots, hiking gear, belt buckles that didn't belong to Civil War soldiers. You son of a bitch, I whispered. How many? Enough to fill out the ranks. A proper army needs proper numbers. Morrison raised the bones in his hands like a conductor preparing for a symphony. And now, it needs proper officers. The dead soldiers started moving. Toward us, weapons raised. But they moved wrong, jerky and unnatural, like marionettes controlled by an amateur puppeteer. That gave me an idea. Lisa, I said quietly. These soldiers died following orders, right? Right. So they still respond to military command? Before she could answer, I stepped forward and snapped to attention. 16 years as a military police officer had ingrained certain responses deep in my bones. Attention, I barked in my best drill sergeant voice. Every skeletal soldier stopped moving, their weapons lowered slightly. Even Morrison looked surprised. Company, halt! The dead army froze in place. Morrison waved his bone batons frantically, but the soldiers weren't responding to him anymore. They were responding to proper military authority. What are you doing? Morrison screamed. Something you never learned, I said, walking slowly toward the center of the formation. You can't command soldiers if you've never been one. I could feel the weight of all those empty eye sockets watching me. But there was something else now. Recognition. These men had died as soldiers, and some part of them still remembered what that meant. Company! About face! The skeletal warriors turned as one to face Morrison. Their weapons came up, pointing at the man who had enslaved them. No! Morrison raised his hands, bones clattering. I control you. I called you back. You trapped us, said a voice that came from everywhere and nowhere. Old, tired, but filled with dignity. We were ready to rest. Morrison started backing away, but there was nowhere to go. The bone circles surrounded him, and now the soldiers were closing in. Please, he whispered. I just wanted to understand. I wanted to learn from you. Then learn this, the voice said. A soldier's duty ends with honor, not servitude. That's when I realized what I had to do. These men had died fight. Ingund. They'd been trapped in an eternal battle by Morrison's necromancy, but they weren't monsters. They were soldiers who deserved to finally stand down. Company present arms! The skeletal soldiers raised their weapons to their shoulders in perfect formation, a final salute. Order arms! The weapons lowered. Company, dismissed. The effect was immediate. The bones began to crumble, falling apart like they'd been held together by nothing but will and duty. The soldiers' forms wavered, became transparent, and then faded away completely. But as they disappeared, I heard something that will stay with me forever. Dozens of voices speaking in unison. Thank you, sir. Morrison screamed as his power source dissolved around him. The bone batons in his hands cracked and fell to pieces. Without the necromantic energy to sustain them, the bone circles collapsed. Lisa was already moving toward the bound woman, cutting her free with her knife. The hiker was alive, terrified, but unharmed. She'd been Morrison's next recruit, but we'd gotten there in time. Morrison himself tried to run, but he didn't get far. 15 years of living wild in the mountains had made him strong, but he was still just one man against two trained law enforcement officers. We had him in custody within minutes. The official report listed Morrison as a serial killer who had murdered at least 6 hikers over a 15-year period. The bone arrangements were described as elaborate ritualistic displays designed to intimidate and disorient victims. The archaeological team that came in later found significant Civil War battlefield remains and recommended the area be designated as a historical site. Nobody mentioned the marching sounds or the voices in the wind. Nobody talked about soldiers who fought with weapons that should have been rust and dust a century ago. Some things don't go in official reports, but I know what I saw, and more importantly, I know what I felt in those final moments when the dead soldiers finally laid down their arms. Relief, gratitude, peace after more than 100 years of unwilling service. Morrison's in prison now, life without parole. Sometimes he writes me letters from his cell, rambling about bone magic and the thin places between life and death. I don't read them anymore. Some knowledge isn't worth having. Lisa transferred to a different district 6 months later. Said the mountains still felt too heavy with old sorrows. I understood. But somebody has to watch these woods, and after what happened, I think it should be someone who understands what's really buried here. I've been getting reports from other rangers lately. Appalachian region, mostly places where Civil War battles were fought. Hikers finding bone arrangements. Sounds of marching in the forest. Equipment malfunctions near old battlefield sites. Morrison wasn't the only one who learned to wake the dead. He was just the first one we caught. Last week, a ranger in Virginia called me about finding bone circles near the wilderness battlefield. Just like the ones in your report, he said. But these are different somehow, more organized, like whoever built them learned from Morrison's mistakes. I told him what I've learned in the years since Cranberry. Respect the war dead, they've earned their rest. But if someone's disturbing that rest, you need to be ready for more than just law enforcement. You need to be ready to help soldiers remember their honor. Because here's the thing about the dead. They don't forget. They don't forgive. But they can be convinced to find peace if you approach them as what they were. Human beings who answered their country's call and paid the ultimate price. The mountains of Appalachia are full of such men. Most of them sleep quiet in unmarked graves, their service done and their souls at rest. But some are restless. Some are waiting for someone to tell them it's okay to stand down. I'm still here in Cranberry Wilderness, still walking these trails, still listening to the forest. And sometimes, on quiet nights when the wind is just right, I hear them. Not marching this time, just talking among themselves, the way soldiers do when the fighting's over and they're waiting to go home. They're at peace now. But I keep listening, just in case someone tries to wake them up again. Because if they do, those soldiers are going to need an officer they can trust. My name is David Ashworth, and I'm still on duty. My name is William Thorne, but folks around here call me Iron Will. I've been a park ranger for 19 years, walking these Appalachian mountains since I was 27 years old. My daddy was a ranger before me, and his daddy before him. This land is in my blood. I worked the backcountry of Shenandoah National Park in Virginia, mostly around the Skyline Drive area near Stony Man Mountain. It's beautiful country, rolling hills covered in oak and maple, limestone caves that go down deeper than anyone's ever mapped, and stone formations that make sounds when the wind hits them just right. Or wrong, depending on how you look at it. People think being a ranger is all about helping lost tourists and putting out campfires. But out here in the deep woods, 40 miles from the nearest town, it's different. I do search and rescue mostly. When hikers go missing in these mountains, I'm the one they call. I know every trail, every cave, every hollow. I can track a deer through snow or find water in a drought. These skills kept me alive through 3 major mountain emergencies, including that avalanche in '78 that trapped 6 people for 4 days. My radio's loaded with all the right frequencies. I carried GPS equipment, though it doesn't always work right in these mountains. Too many tall peaks and deep valleys. I've got climbing gear, medical supplies, emergency flares, and enough food and water for a week in the field. After 19 years, I know what works and what doesn't. But I never believed the old mountain stories. Every ranger hears them eventually. Tales the Cherokee told about spirits that live in the hollows, things that steal souls and leave empty shells walking around. Old-timers still talk about the empty ones sometimes, usually after a few drinks. I always figured it was just mountain folklore, stories to keep kids from wandering too far into the woods. That all changed in late October 1984. It started as one of those perfect fall days that bring the leaf peepers up from the cities. The maples were burning red and gold, the air was crisp and clean. Indian summer had been hanging around for weeks, keeping things warm and pleasant. Then overnight, like someone flipped a switch, bitter cold moved in. I woke up that morning, and my breath was steaming in the air inside my cabin. The call came in around 9 a.m. Family of four, the Hendersons, had gone missing during what should have been a simple day hike. Bob and Sarah Henderson, their two kids, Tommy and Lisa, ages 8 and 10. They'd driven up from Richmond to see the leaves. Nice family from what I heard. Bob was a banker, Sarah taught elementary school. Good people who just wanted to show their kids something beautiful. Their car was found still running on the Skyline Drive overlook, driver's door hanging open. Purse still on the front seat, keys in the ignition, radio playing soft country music. Like they'd just stepped out for a minute and planned to come right back. But they never did. I suited up and headed out within an hour. Standard procedure is to start with a 3-person grid search, but the other rangers were dealing with a rock slide on the main trail. It was just me, at least until helicopter support could get there at first light tomorrow. The leaves crunched under my boots as I followed their trail down from the overlook. The Hendersons had good hiking boots. I could see their prints clear as day in the soft earth. Bob's size 11 Timberlands, Sarah's smaller boots, and the two kids in matching sneakers. They'd walked single file down the ridge trail, probably looking for a better view of the valley. That's when I found the first strange thing. About a quarter-mile down the trail, near the edge of what locals call Devil's Backbone, a narrow ridge that drops off sharp on both sides. Their footprints just stopped. Not like they turned around or stepped off the trail. They just ended right there in the middle of the path, like the whole family had been lifted up into the air. I circled the area for an hour, looking for where they might have left the trail. Nothing. It was like they'd just vanished into thin air. That should have been my first warning that something was very wrong in these mountains. I set up my base camp near where the footprints ended and started a proper grid search. The sun was getting lower, casting long shadows through the trees. I had maybe 2 hours of good light left. That's when I noticed the silence. In 19 years of walking these mountains, I'd never heard quiet like this. No birds singing, no squirrels chattering, no insects buzzing. Even the wind had stopped. It was like the whole forest was holding its breath. My compass started acting up first. The needle spun in slow circles, never settling on north. Then my GPS unit started showing impossible readings. 1 minute it said I was at 3,500 feet elevation. The next it claimed I was 200 feet below sea level. My radio crackled with static no matter what frequency I tried. I was checking my gear when I saw them. The jackets. 4 jackets. 2 adult-sized, 2 children's, hanging neatly from tree branches 30 feet off the ground. Not thrown up there or caught by wind. Hung up carefully, like someone had climbed up and arranged them just so. I called out, "Bob, Sarah, can you hear me?" My voice echoed strangely in the stillness. No answer. I got out my climbing gear and went up after the jackets. They were definitely the Hendersons. I could see the family photo in Bob's wallet, still in the jacket pocket. But there was no way they could have gotten up there on their own. No broken branches, no disturbed leaves, nothing to show how someone had climbed 30 feet up a smooth oak tree. As I was coming down, rappelling slowly through the branches, I found something that made my blood run cold. Carved into the tree trunks, Enki, about 20 feet up, were symbols. Not random scratches. Carefully carved symbols that looked old, much older than the tree itself. They matched descriptions I'd heard from Cherokee elders, warnings about places where spirits lived. places where souls could be stolen. The locals called such places thin spots, places where the wall between our world and something else got weak. I was starting to think Devil's Backbone might be one of those places. By the time I got back to the ground, the temperature had dropped 20 degrees. Frost was forming on the leaves around me, making patterns that looked almost like human figures reaching out with desperate hands. My breath came out in thick white clouds. That's when I heard footsteps. Slow, careful footsteps coming through the trees toward me. I called out again. "Henderson family? That you?" A man stepped out of the shadows between the trees, middle-aged, wearing khaki pants and a flannel shirt. He looked exactly like the photo I'd seen in Bob Henderson's wallet. "Thank God," I said, moving toward him. "Bob Henderson, I'm Ranger Thorne. Everyone's been looking for you folks. Where are Sarah and the kids?" Bob Henderson smiled at me. It was a perfectly normal smile, the kind a relieved father gives when help finally arrives. But something about it made my skin crawl. "They're back at camp," he said in a flat, empty voice. "We got turned around in the dark. Been waiting for someone to find us." I looked at him more carefully. His clothes were clean. No dirt, no tears, no sign that he'd spent a day and night lost in the mountains. His hair was combed. His shoes weren't even scuffed. "Where's your jacket, Bob?" I asked. "It's pretty cold out here." He looked down at himself like he'd just noticed. "Must have dropped it somewhere. Sarah will have something to say about that." He laughed, but it sounded wrong, like one who'd heard laughter but never understood what it meant. "Let's go get your family," I said, unsure why every instinct I had was screaming danger. As we walked, I noticed Bob Henderson's shadow. In the dim evening light, my shadow stretched out behind me, normal as could be. But Bob's shadow seemed to move independently, reaching toward mine like it was trying to grab something. I blinked hard and looked again. His shadow was normal now. Just tricks of the light, I told myself. Stress and a long day in the mountains. But deep down, I knew something was terribly wrong with the man walking beside me. We hiked for maybe 20 minutes before we came to their camp. It was set up in a small clearing I'd never seen before, though I could have sworn I knew every clearing on Devil's Backbone. There was Sarah Henderson sitting on a fallen log, and the two kids playing some kind of quiet game with sticks and stones. "Look who I found," Bob called out in that same flat voice. Sarah looked up and smiled. Like her husband, she was perfectly clean and neat, like she'd just stepped out of a suburban kitchen instead of spending 2 days lost in the wilderness. "Oh, thank goodness," she said. "We were so worried someone might not find us." The kids didn't look up from their game. They just kept arranging sticks in careful patterns, humming a tune I didn't recognize. I walked over to the small stream that ran through the clearing to fill my water bottle. As I knelt down, I happened to look into the still water of a pool. I could see my reflection perfectly clear, but when I looked at the spot where the Henderson family should have been reflected, there was nothing. Nothing at all. That's when I knew these weren't the Henderson family anymore. These were something else wearing their faces. I forced myself to stay calm and act normal, even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Whatever these things were, they looked exactly like the Hendersons. They talked like the Hendersons, but they cast no reflections, and that flat way of talking made my skin crawl. "Well," I said, standing up slowly, "we should get you folks back to your car. It's getting dark, and it's going to be a cold night." "Oh, we're quite comfortable here," Sarah said with that same empty smile. "The children love camping." I looked at Tommy and Lisa. They were still playing with sticks, but now I could see what they were building. It looked like a little house made of twigs and leaves, and inside the house were 4 small shapes that looked disturbingly like human figures. "Mom," Lisa said without looking up, "can we keep the new ones?" Sarah's smile got wider. "We'll see, honey. We'll see." My hand moved slowly toward the radio on my belt, hoping to get some kind of signal. But all I got was static, mixed with what sounded like whispers in a language I didn't understand. That's when I heard more footsteps. 3 more people came walking into the clearing. A young couple and an elderly man, all dressed in hiking gear. I didn't recognize them, but they had that same clean, too neat appearance as the Hendersons. "Found some more lost hikers," Bob Henderson said. "They were wandering around looking confused." The young woman stepped forward. "Thank you so much for helping us, Ranger. We got so turned around. These nice people have been taking care of us." But when she talked, her lips didn't quite match the words, like watching a movie where the sound doesn't sync up right. "How long have you been lost?" I asked. "Oh, just today," she said. But the man with her shook his head and held up 3 fingers. Then the elderly man held up 5 fingers. They weren't even trying to keep their story straight. I was starting to understand what was happening, though my mind fought against it. These weren't lost hikers. They were more of whatever the Hendersons had become, and they were collecting people. "You know," I said, backing slowly toward the edge of the clearing. "I see. Put radio in and let everyone know you're safe. Then we can all hike out together in the morning." "No need for that," Bob Henderson said, and for the first time his voice had emotion in it. Not human emotion, something cold and hungry. "We have everything we need right here." All of them started moving toward me at once, not running, just walking with that same careful, deliberate pace. But there was something wrong with how they moved. Too smooth, like they were floating just above the ground. I ran. Behind me, I could hear them following, but they weren't making any noise. No footsteps, no breathing, no rustling of leaves. They moved through the forest like ghosts. I crashed through the trees, branches whipping at my face, trying to get back to the main trail. But every path I took seemed to lead me in circles. The forest had become a maze, and I was trapped inside it with things that wore human faces but cast no shadows. After running for what felt like hours, I stumbled into another clearing. This one was different, older, with standing stones arranged in a circle. The stones were covered in the same symbols I'd seen carved in the tree, and hanging from the trees around the clearing were more clothes, dozens of them. Jackets, shirts, pants, hiking boots, all arranged neatly like they'd been hung up to dry. But there were no people. Then I saw the cave. It was a narrow opening in the limestone cliff face, just wide enough for a person to squeeze through. The symbols were carved deep into the stone around the entrance, and from inside came a sound like wind, but wind that whispered in human voices. I knew I shouldn't go in there. Every survival instinct I had was screaming at me to run the other way. But I was a search and rescue ranger, and people were missing. If there was even a chance the real Henderson family was in that cave, I had to look. I clicked on my flashlight and squeezed through the opening. Inside, the cave opened up into a huge chamber. The walls were covered in those strange symbols, carved so deep they looked like they'd been made by claws instead of tools. And hanging from the ceiling were things that made me sick to look at. Human skins. Perfectly intact human skins, hanging like empty clothes. Men, women, children. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Some looked fresh, others looked old and dried. All of them still had faces, but the faces were empty, like masks with nothing behind them. And in the center of the chamber, I saw them. The real things, the hollow men. They weren't human at all. They were tall and thin, with skin that looked like gray stone. Their faces were smooth and featureless, except for holes where eyes should be. And they were carefully taking one of the hanging skins down from the ceiling, examining it like a person might examine a coat before putting it on. As I watched in horror, one of the creatures slipped into the skin like it was getting dressed. The empty features filled out, became human. In seconds, it looked exactly like a middle-aged man I didn't recognize. It walked over to a mirror made of polished stone and practiced smiling. That's when I understood. The hollow men didn't kill people. They hollowed them out and wore them like suits. And the things I'd met in the forest, those weren't the Henderson family at all. They were creatures wearing the Hendersons' empty skins. Behind me, I heard a sound like wind chimes. I turned around slowly. Standing in the cave entrance were all the fake people I'd met. Bob, Sarah, Tommy, Lisa, and the others. But now they weren't bothering to act human anymore. Their faces hung loose and empty, like masks that didn't fit right. "Welcome to our collection," the thing wearing Bob Henderson's skin said. "You'll make a fine addition." They started walking toward me, and I could see through the gaps where their skins didn't fit quite right. Underneath was nothing but darkness. I backed deeper into the cave, my flashlight beam dancing wildly across the walls. The hollow men wearing human skins followed me slowly, like they had all the time in the world. And maybe they did. "Don't be afraid," the thing wearing Sarah Henderson's face said in that flat, empty voice. "It doesn't hurt, you just go to sleep, and then we take care of the rest." "What did you do to the real Hendersons?" I demanded, though I think I already knew the answer. "They're right here," Bob Thing said, gesturing to the hanging skins. "Safe and sound. We take very good care of them." That's when I saw it. In the far corner of the cave, hanging with the others, were 4 fresh skins. A man, a woman, and 2 children. The real Henderson family, their empty faces frozen in expressions of terror. I felt sick, but I couldn't stop looking. Because next to the Henderson skins was another one I recognized. An older skin, dried and yellowed with age. It wore a ranger's uniform from the 1960s. My father's uniform. "You recognize him," the thing wearing Bob Henderson said, following my gaze. "He was one of our favorites, wore his skin for 22 years before we got tired of him." The ground seemed to tilt under my feet. "No. My father died in a hiking accident in 1962. I was there at the funeral. You buried an empty coffin," Sarah Thing said with that horrible smile. "We kept the original. Would you like to see him?" Behind them, one of the gray creatures was taking down my father's skin from its hook. As I watched in horror, it began to put it on like a coat. The features filled out. The face became real. And suddenly I was looking at my father exactly as he'd been 22 years ago. "Hello, son," he said in my father's voice. But the eyes were wrong. They were completely black, like looking into deep water at night. "I've been waiting for you to come home." All the memories came flooding back. How my father had changed after his accident. How he'd become cold and distant, speaking in that same flat tone. How he'd tried to get me to come camping with him in these same mountains, but something had always felt wrong about it. How he'd died, really died, when I was 25, and at the funeral, I'd felt relieved instead of sad. "You knew," I whispered. "Some part of me always knew you weren't really him." "Smart boy," the thing wearing my father's face said, "but not smart enough to stay away." They were closing in now, forming a circle around me. I could feel something tugging at my chest, like invisible hands trying to pull something out of me. My vision started to blur, and I felt weak and dizzy. That's when my hand touched something in my jacket pocket. The Cherokee protection charm my grandmother had given me when I was a boy. I'd carried it for years without really believing in it, just because it reminded me of her. The moment my fingers closed around the small leather pouch, the tugging sensation stopped. The creatures stepped back, hissing like angry cats. "Grandmother always said this would protect me," I gasped, pulling out the charm. It was warm in my hand, almost hot. "She said there were thin places in these mountains where bad things lived." The fake people were backing away from me now, their borrowed faces twisting with anger and fear. "Cherokee magic," my father thing snarled. "We thought that knowledge was lost." I remembered more of my grandmother's stories now, about tobacco prayers and sacred fires, about running water and blessed ground. The Cherokee had dealt with these creatures for hundreds of years before the first white settlers arrived. "You can't have me," I said, standing straighter. "And you can't have anyone else." I pulled out my emergency flare gun with my free hand. The creatures lunged toward me, but I was already moving. I ran deeper into the cave, looking for what I needed. There, an underground stream running through the back of the chamber. Running water. They couldn't cross running water. I splashed into the stream and turned to face them. They stood at the water's edge, clawing at the air, but unable to follow. "This ends now," I said, and fired the flare into the hanging skins. The whole cave erupted in flames. Not normal fire. This burned white and clean, like sunlight. The creatures screamed, a sound like wind through broken glass. Their borrowed faces began to melt and slide off, revealing the gray, empty things underneath. The hanging skins didn't burn. Instead, they began to glow with soft light. And from each one, something rose up. Transparent figures that looked grateful and peaceful. Souls, I realized. All the souls the Hollow Men had stolen over the years, finally free to go wherever souls are supposed to go. The creatures themselves began to crumble like old wood, their gray forms falling apart and blowing away like ash. The last thing I saw before the cave collapsed was my father's real face, not the hollow imitation, but him as he really was, smiling at me with love and pride before fading into the light. I woke up 3 days later in the hospital in Luray. The official report said there'd been a cave-in near Devil's Backbone, and I'd been found unconscious near the entrance with smoke inhalation and a concussion. The Henderson family was listed as victims of the same cave-in. Their bodies never recovered. The Park Service gave me a commendation for trying to save them and transferred me to a different district for my own well-being. I didn't argue. I needed to get away from those mountains for a while. But the transfer didn't change what I'd learned. Over the next few months, I started researching similar incidents at other parks throughout Appalachian territory. Missing hikers whose cars were found with engines still running. Families that vanished without a trace near limestone caves. People who came back from camping trips. Different. I found dozens of cases, maybe hundreds, all in places where Cherokee stories mentioned thin spots between worlds. The thing is, I can spot them now, the hollow ones. You learn to look for the signs. The way they do, can't quite sync up when they talk. The too perfect cleanliness, the lack of reflection in still water. Most importantly, you look in their eyes. Really look. Human eyes have depth, emotion, life. Hollow eyes are just empty, like looking into a deep well at midnight. I've seen 3 of them since Devil's Backbone. One was a hiker who asked for directions to a remote cave system. I sent him the wrong way and radioed ahead to other rangers to watch for him. He never turned up again. The second was a woman at a gas station who claimed to be lost, looking for a specific mountain trail. Her shadow moved wrong when she wasn't paying attention. I told her the trail was closed for the season. She smiled that empty smile and drove away. The third was the hardest. It was a man who looked exactly like my old partner, Jake Morrison. He showed up at my new ranger station last month, claiming he'd been transferred from Shenandoah to help with a special case. But Jake and I had worked together for 10 years, and I knew the way he laughed when he thought something was funny. This thing didn't laugh right. I made an excuse and called the real Jake at home. He answered on the second ring, very much alive and working a desk job in Richmond after an early retirement due to a back injury. When I came back outside, the fake Jake was gone. So here's what I want you to understand. If someone you love goes missing in the mountains and comes back, changed, you need to pay attention. Look for the signs. Trust your instincts when something feels wrong, even if you can't explain why. The Cherokee were right about thin places. There are spots in these old mountains where the wall between our world and somewhere else gets thin. Places where things that should stay hidden can reach through and take what doesn't belong to them. Most of these places are sealed up now, burned clean with sacred fire. But some aren't. Some are still out there, waiting. And the things that live in them are patient. They've got all the time in the world. If you're planning to hike in Cherokee territory, anywhere in the Appalachians where the stones are old and the caves run deep, do yourself a favor. Carry tobacco for prayers. Stay away from limestone caves marked with strange symbols. Don't camp alone near running water that suddenly goes silent. And if someone in your group goes missing and comes back too quickly, too clean, with eyes that don't reflect light the right way, run. My name is William Thorne, and I've been protecting these mountains for 19 years. Some things in the mountains are beautiful beyond words. Others should stay buried in the dark. The trick is knowing which is which. My name is Rebecca McLeod, but everyone calls me Mountain Rose. I've been a ranger on Grandfather Mountain for 11 years now, and I've seen things up there that would make most people pack up and move to Florida. But December 15th, 1978, that was the day I learned some mountains don't want to be climbed. I was checking gear in the rescue station when the call came in. 6 rock climbers had gotten caught in a sudden blizzard near the summit. The weather report said clear skies. But anyone who's worked these peaks knows Mother Nature doesn't read forecasts. "McLeod here," I answered the radio, pulling on my thermal layers. The temperature had dropped 20 degrees in the last hour. "Rebecca, we've got a situation." It was dispatch, and Sarah's voice had that tight edge that meant trouble. "Climbing party of 6, last contact 2 hours ago. They reported impossible weather conditions and requested immediate evacuation." I looked out the window at the swirling snow. The peaks were lost in white, and the wind was howling like something wild and angry. "Helicopter?" "Grounded. Winds are hitting 80 miles per hour up there. You're the only one certified for high-angle rescue in these conditions." I'd done this dance before. 200 mountain rescues over 11 years, and I'd brought everyone home alive. Well, almost everyone. My climbing partner Jake had died on these same peaks 3 years ago. Equipment failure, they said. Freak accident. But standing there, watching the storm rage against the windows, something cold settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. "I'll need backup," I said, loading my pack with rope, ice axes, and emergency shelter gear. "Tommy Clearwater is already heading up the lower trail. He'll meet you at Pine Gap." Tommy was Cherokee, born and raised in these mountains. His grandfather used to tell stories about Grandfort, their mountain that made my skin crawl. Tales about giant birds and spirits that demanded payment from those who dared climb too high. Old superstitions, I always figured. But Tommy took them seriously. I drove up the Blue Ridge Parkway as far as the road stayed clear, then strapped on my snowshoes and started hiking. The trail disappeared after the first mile, buried under 2 feet of fresh powder. But I knew these mountains like my own heartbeat. Every ridge, every cliff, every dangerous drop-off. The wind cut through my jacket like it was made of paper. This wasn't normal December weather for North Carolina. We got snow, sure, but not like this. Not with wind that seemed to come from every direction at once, or snowflakes that sometimes fell upward instead of down. I found Tommy waiting at Pine Gap, his dark face grim under his wool cap. "You shouldn't go up there today, Mountain Rose." 6 people are trapped, Tommy. They'll freeze to death if I don't reach them by nightfall." He grabbed my arm as I started past him. "My grandfather called this place Tanawa, the great hawk spirit. Some peaks ain't meant for climbing. Your grandfather's stories won't help those climbers." I pulled free, but his words followed me up the mountain. The higher I climbed, the worse things felt. It wasn't just the cold or the wind. The mountain itself seemed wrong somehow. Rock formations I'd known for years looked different, like someone had rearranged them when I wasn't looking. My compass spun wildly, unable to find magnetic north. At 4,000 feet, I found the first sign of the climbing party, a bright red rope tangled around a boulder. But when I examined it closer, my blood went cold. The rope wasn't just tangled. It was embedded in the solid granite, like the rock had been liquid when the rope touched it, then hardened around the fibers. That's when I heard the first cry, high, overhead, cutting through the wind like a blade. It sounded like no bird I'd ever heard before, too big and too angry. The cry echoed off the peaks, seeming to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I keyed my radio with shaking fingers. "Dispatch, this is McLeod. Something's not right up here." Static answered me. I was on my own. The trail to the summit got steeper and more dangerous with every step. Ice covered everything, turning familiar handholds into death traps. But I'd climbed in worse conditions. At least, I thought I had. I found them at 5,200 feet, huddled inside 2 emergency bivouac shelters they'd managed to set up on a narrow ledge. The shelters were barely holding against the wind, and I could hear voices inside, scared, cold, but still alive. "Hello in there," I called out. "Park Service, I'm here to get you down." The shelter zipped open, and a woman's face appeared, pale and frightened. "Thank God. We've been stuck here for hours. The weather just came out of nowhere." I crawled into the larger shelter where 4 of them waited. 2 men and 2 women, all experienced climbers judging by their gear. They looked shaken in a way that had nothing to do with cold. "Where are the other 2?" I asked. The woman who'd first spoken, her name tag said Lisa, pointed with a trembling hand toward the cliff face. "Mark and Dave went to secure our ropes when the storm hit. They haven't come back." I looked where she pointed and felt my stomach drop. There, about 50 feet up the vertical rock face, 2 figures hung motionless from their ropes. They were perfectly still, frozen in impossible positions, standing upright against the cliff like they were walking on solid ground. "How long have they been like that?" I asked. 2 hours, maybe 3. Time feels strange up here." I pulled out my binoculars and focused on the 2 climbers. What I saw made no sense. They weren't hanging from their ropes at all. They were standing on the vertical cliff face, frozen solid but upright, as if gravity had forgotten to work on them. "We have to get you down from here. Now." I started packing their gear, moving fast. Something was very wrong on this mountain, and it was getting worse. That's when the second cry came, closer this time, and so loud it shook snow from the overhanging rocks. The sound seemed to vibrate in my chest, making my heart skip beats. The 4 climbers pressed closer together, their eyes wide with terror. "What was that?" one of the men whispered. I didn't answer because I didn't know, but I was starting to remember stories Tommy's grandfather used to tell. Stories about a great bird that lived in the highest peaks, a spirit that demanded payment from anyone who dared enter its territory. The wind suddenly stopped. Complete silence fell over the mountain, so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. That's when I saw it, a shadow passing overhead, impossibly huge, blotting out what little light filtered through the storm clouds. The shadow moved wrong, too slow for a bird, too purposeful for a cloud, and it was massive, easily 60 feet from wingtip to wingtip. As it passed over us, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees, and frost began forming on my exposed skin. "Nobody move," I whispered. "Don't even breathe loud." But the shadow wasn't finished with us. It circled back, lower this time, and I caught a glimpse of what cast it. Feathers that looked like black steel, talons the size of tree branches, and eyes that glowed with an intelligence that was ancient and hungry. The great bird spirit, Tanauha. It was real. One of the climbers, a young man with a beard, suddenly stood up. "I'm getting out of here." He grabbed his pack and started toward the cliff edge. "No!" I lunged for him, but I was too late. The moment his foot touched the rock outside our shelter, the creature struck. I never saw it move. 1 second he was running, the next he was gone, plucked from the ledge like a mouse, taken by a hawk. His scream faded into the distance, swallowed by the wind. The 3 remaining climbers stared at the empty space where their friend had been standing. Lisa started, crying, quiet sobs that barely carried over the returning wind. "What is that thing?" she whispered. I looked up at Mark and Dave, still frozen against the cliff face, and suddenly understood. They weren't climbing when the storm hit. They were trying to run. The creature had caught them, frozen them in place as a warning, or maybe as decoration. "Pack everything, we're leaving now." I helped them stuff gear into backpacks, my hands shaking. "And whatever happens, stay close to me. Don't run. Running just makes it interested." As we prepared to rappel down from the ledge, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Scratching sounds from above like giant claws dragging across granite. Then I saw them. Gouges in the solid rock, each one 18 inches long and 3 inches deep. Fresh gouges that hadn't been there when I'd climbed up. The creature was marking its territory, and we were trespassing. Getting down from the ledge should have been simple. I'd done emergency rappels in worse conditions. But as soon as we started our descent, everything went wrong. The ropes I'd carried up the mountain, ropes I'd inspected that morning, were freezing solid the moment I pulled them from my pack. Not just cold, but actually turning into rigid cables that could snap under our weight. The metal hardware became so cold it would freeze to bare skin on contact. "Use your gloves," I told the 3 remaining climbers. Don't touch any metal directly. Lisa went first, with me belaying from above. She made it down 20 feet before the problem started. The rope began vibrating like a guitar string, humming with a frequency that hurt my ears. Then Lisa screamed. "The rock is moving," she called up to us. "The cliff face is changing." I looked down and saw she was right. The familiar granite features I'd climbed hundreds of times were shifting, flowing like thick liquid, handhold. This appeared and disappeared. Ledges moved when you tried to step on them. Above us, that terrible cry echoed again, closer than ever. The creature was watching, playing with us. I could feel its eyes like cold spots on my back. "Keep moving," I shouted down to Lisa. "Don't stop." But as the second climber, a man named Derek, started his descent, the mountain itself seemed to wake up angry. Wind blasted us from all directions at once, trying to tear us from the ropes. Snow fell upward in spirals, creating whirlwinds that made it impossible to see. That's when I heard Tommy's voice, faint but carrying on the wind. "Mountain rose. Don't fight it. You have to make an offering." I looked down the mountain and saw him climbing toward us, moving faster than should have been possible in the deep snow. But he stopped at a line of exposed rock about 200 feet below, refusing to come higher. "What kind of offering?" I yelled back. His answer chilled me more than the wind. "Blood, Mountain Rose. The old agreement requires blood." The creature cried again, and this time I heard something else in its voice. Not just anger, but hunger. It wanted payment for the climbers who had dared its sacred heights. Lisa reached the bottom of our rappel, but Derek was in trouble. Halfway down, his rope had frozen completely solid. He dangled there, unable to move up or down, the metal hardware cutting into his hands, even through his gloves. "I can't move," he called up. "The gear is stuck." I started down after him, but the mountain had other ideas. The rock face around Derek began to bulge outward, pushing him away from the cliff. I watched in horror as the granite formed itself into the shape of a massive hand, fingers closing around Derek's body. He screamed once, a sound that cut off abruptly as the stone fingers tightened. When the rock hand opened again, Derek was gone, not fallen. Gone. Like he'd never existed at all. The remaining climber, a woman named Carol, was crying openly now. "This isn't possible. Rocks don't move like that. Birds don't get that big. Possible or not, it's happening." I helped her get ready for her descent, and we need to get off this mountain before it decides it wants all of us. But as Carol started down the rope, I realized we had a bigger problem. The creature wasn't just hunting us randomly. It was herding us, driving us towards something specific. Every time we tried to take the safe route down, wind or moving rock forced us toward the east face, the steepest, most dangerous part of the mountain. The east face, where ancient Cherokee petroglyphs were carved into the stone, pictures of giant birds carrying away human figures. Pictures that I'd always assumed were just mythology. I was beginning to understand that Jake's death 3 years ago hadn't been an accident. He'd been taken by this thing, claimed as payment for climbing too high. And now it wanted more. Carol made it down safely, but when I started my own descent, the creature made its move. The shadow passed over me again, and suddenly I wasn't rappelling down rock anymore. I was hanging in empty air, 40 feet out from the cliff face, spinning slowly as enormous wings beat around me. The great bird had me. I looked up into eyes the size of dinner plates, ancient and intelligent, and completely without mercy. This close, I could see that it wasn't entirely natural. Feathers that looked like black metal, talons that glowed with their own cold light, and something else. Markings on its chest that looked almost like Cherokee symbols. It spoke to me. Not with words, but with wind and electrical storm that formed thoughts directly in my mind. "You guide them to sacred places," the voice said. "You break the old agreements. Payment is required." I understood then. Every climbing rescue I'd ever done, every hiker I'd guided to safety, I'd been leading people into this creature's territory. In its eyes, I was responsible for every trespass. "Let them go," I gasped, struggling against talons that could have crushed me easily. "Take me instead." The creature tilted its massive head, considering. Then it spoke again, and this time there was something like amusement in the voice. "You will choose, guide of trespassers, your life or theirs, but payment will be made." It dropped me back onto the ledge next to Carol and Lisa, both of them staring in shock. Above us, Mark and Dave still hung frozen against the cliff, and I realized they weren't dead. They were trapped, conscious but unable to move, watching everything that happened below. The creature settled on an outcropping above us, wings folded, waiting for my decision. I stood on that narrow ledge, looking up at the creature that had claimed my mountain, and felt something shift inside me. Fear was still there, cold and sharp, but underneath it was something else. Anger. "The old agreement," I called up to it. What was the agreement? The wind died to a whisper, and in that silence I heard Tommy climbing toward us. He'd finally crossed whatever line had been holding him back, and his face was grim with purpose. "I'll tell you the agreement, Mountain Rose," he said, as he reached our ledge. He pulled something from his pack, tobacco in a small leather pouch. "My great-grandfather made a deal with Tanawa 200 years ago. Cherokee hunters could use these peaks for ceremony, but no one else. The mountain would be protected, and the spirit would be honored." He scattered tobacco on the rock, speaking words in Cherokee that I didn't understand, but that made the creature above us shift restlessly. "Then white settlers came," Tommy continued. "They didn't know the agreement. They didn't make offerings, so Tanawa started taking payment in blood." The creature spread its wings, each feather catching the dim light like black mirrors. When it spoke again, the voice filled all our minds. "The guide brings many to sacred places. She owes much payment." I pulled out my rescue knife and looked at the blade. Tommy nodded grimly. "Blood offering. Might work, but it has to be freely given, with respect." "How much blood?" I asked. "Enough to show you understand the debt." I cut my palm, letting blood drip onto the granite. The moment it touched stone, the rock began to glow with a faint blue light. Ancient symbols appeared in the granite around us, the same Cherokee petroglyphs I'd seen on the east face, but fresh and bright, as if just carved. The creature watched, head tilted. Then it cried once, a sound that held both approval and warning. "Payment acknowledged," the voice said, "but debt remains large. More payment required." That's when I understood. It wasn't going to be satisfied with just blood. It wanted a life, maybe more than one. "Take me," I said, stepping away from the others. "I'm the guide. I'm responsible." But the creature had other ideas. Instead of accepting my offer, it spread its wings wide and let out a cry that shook the entire mountain. Snow began falling in sheets, and the wind picked up to hurricane force. "All trespassers pay," it said. "Old agreement is broken. New agreement begins now." It dove toward us, talons extended, and I knew it meant to take all of us. But Tommy was ready. He pulled something else from his pack, a necklace of carved bone and feathers that looked older than the mountains themselves. "Tanawa!" he shouted in Cherokee, holding up the necklace. "I invoke the old words. Trial by courage." The creature stopped its dive mere feet above our heads, wings beating frantically to stay aloft. When it spoke again, there was surprise in its voice. "The old words are remembered. Trial is accepted." Tommy looked at me grimly. "Cherokee law says you can prove your worthiness through trial. You have to face the spirit's challenges. If you succeed, it will honor your courage and reduce the debt." "What kind of challenges?" I asked. "The kind that test whether you're worthy to guide others in sacred places." The creature landed on the outcropping again and folded its wings. When it spoke, the voice was different, formal, ritualistic. 3 trials for the guide. Face the height, face the cold, face the truth. The first trial came immediately. The ledge we stood on began to shrink, rock flowing away beneath our feet until we had barely enough room to stand. Below us, the mountain dropped away into darkness, thousands of feet of empty air. One wrong step, one moment of dizziness, and we'd fall forever. Don't look down, I told Lisa and Carol, who were pressed against the cliff face, terrified. Look at the rock in front of you. Just the rock. But I had to look down. That was my trial. To face the height without flinching, to prove I could guide others safely, even in impossible conditions. I stepped to the very edge of the ledge and looked straight down into the abyss. Vertigo hit me like a physical blow. My vision swirled, and for a moment I thought I was falling. But I stayed standing, feet planted firmly on stone, and gradually the dizziness passed. Trial of height. Passed, the creature acknowledged. The second trial was worse. The temperature dropped so fast that frost formed on my exposed skin in seconds. My breath came out in white clouds that froze and fell like glass. The cold was beyond anything I'd experienced, cold that burned like fire and made my bones ache. Lisa and Carol were both shivering violently, their lips turning blue. If this lasted much longer, they'd die from hypothermia. But I realized that was part of the trial. Not just to face the cold myself, but to keep others alive in it. I pulled them close, sharing body heat, and started talking. Telling them about rescues I'd made, mountains I'd climbed, anything to keep them conscious and fighting. The cold was trying to make us give up, to lie down in the snow until it's sleep forever. But I'd been fighting mountain weather for 11 years. I knew how to stay alive. Trial of cold, passed. The third trial was the hardest. The creature's voice filled my mind, and suddenly I was seeing the mountain through its eyes. Every rescue I'd ever done, every hiker I'd guided to safety, but also every climber who had died. Jake, 3 years ago, falling from an ice-covered cliff. Mark and Dave, frozen against the rock face above us. Derek, crushed by living stone. See the truth, guide of trespassers, the voice commanded. How many have died because you led them here? I saw them all. Dozen of climbers over the years who had died on my mountain, some from weather, some from falls, some from simple bad luck. And according to the creature, I was responsible for every death because I had brought people into its territory. The guilt hit me like an avalanche. Jake's face, the last time I saw him alive. The families I'd had to tell that their loved ones weren't coming home. All the search and rescue missions that ended in body recovery instead of salvation. But then I saw something else. All the people I had saved. Hundreds of them over 11 years. Families reunited, lives continued. Children who grew up with their parents because I had brought them down safely from dangerous places. I accept responsibility, I said out loud, but I won't accept guilt for doing my job. These mountains are dangerous, but they're also beautiful. People have the right to experience them. My job is to make sure they can do it as safely as possible. The creature was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, it nodded its massive head. Trial of truth. Passed. The guide shows wisdom. Above us, Mark and Dave suddenly gasped as they were released from their frozen prison. They rappelled down quickly, shaking and terrified, but alive. The wind died to a whisper, and normal snowfall replaced the supernatural blizzard. Payment is reduced, the creature said. But remember the old agreement, guide. Respect the sacred places, make the proper offerings, and perhaps the mountain will let others pass safely. It spread its wings and launched into the air, disappearing into the clouds in seconds. All that remained was the slowly fading glow of the Cherokee symbols in the granite and the memory of ancient eyes watching from the storm. The rescue took 6 more hours. By the time we reached the ranger station, dawn was breaking clear and cold. The Weather Service reported that their instruments had recorded no unusual activity during the night, just a typical December cold front moving through the mountains. But I knew different, and so did the 5 climbers who had survived the encounter with Tanawa. Mark and Dave were treated for severe hypothermia, but they recovered fully. Neither of them could remember clearly what had happened during their time frozen against the cliff. They spoke of dreams about flying and ancient voices, but dismissed them as hallucinations brought on by cold and oxygen deprivation. The other climbers were more affected. Lisa quit climbing entirely and moved to Florida. Carol still climbs, but only on indoor walls now. She sends me letters sometimes, asking if I think what we experienced was real or just group hallucination brought on by extreme conditions. I never answer those letters directly, but I've made changes to how I do my job. Now, before any rescue above 4,000 feet on Grandfather Mountain, I stop at the Cherokee Reservation and talk to the elders. I carry tobacco in my pack, and I leave offerings at the old petroglyphs. I tell climbers about the mountain's history, not just the geology and weather patterns, but the spiritual significance to the Cherokee people. Some of them laugh. They think I've gone native, gotten too caught up in local superstitions. But the smart ones listen. The smart ones make their own small offerings before they climb. Tommy Clearwater and I work together now, officially. The Park Service created a new position for him, Cultural Liaison Specialist. We teach climbing safety classes that include information about respecting indigenous sacred sites. The accident rate on Grandfather Mountain has dropped by 70% in the 3 years since that December night. But sometimes when the weather turns bad and the wind howls through the peaks, I see shadows moving that are too big to be birds. I hear cries that carry too much intelligence to be natural. And I remember ancient eyes watching from the storm. The Cherokee knew something that took me 11 years to learn. Some mountains don't just challenge your body and your equipment, they test your spirit. And if you're going to guide others into sacred places, you better make sure you understand what you're asking permission to enter. People ask me sometimes why I still work these mountains after what happened, why I don't transfer to a nice, safe desk job in Raleigh. The answer is simple. These peaks are my responsibility now. I made an agreement with something older than our civilization, and I intend to honor it. Because somewhere up there in the highest, most dangerous places, Tanawa is still watching, still protecting what it considers sacred. And as long as people want to challenge themselves against the mountains, they're going to need guides who understand that some agreements are written in blood and wind and ancient stone. The Cherokee have a saying, "The mountain remembers everything." I believe that now, and I make sure every climber who follows me up those peaks learns to remember it too. My name is Rebecca McLeod, and I've been a ranger on Grandfather Mountain for 14 years now. I've learned that the most important part of my job isn't just bringing people down safely. It's making sure they understand what they're climbing in the first place. Some mountains demand respect, and some mountains take payment from those who forget to give it. Remember that. The next time you're tempted to challenge the high places, make your offerings. Show you a respect. And maybe, if you're very careful and very lucky, the mountain will let you pass. But it will always be watching. My name is Samuel Running Bear, but most folks call me Night Wolf. I've been a park ranger for 20 years now, working the night shift in Monongahela National Forest here in West Virginia. People think I got my nickname because of my Lakota heritage, but the truth is simpler. I see better in the dark than most people see in daylight. I grew up learning two worlds. My grandmother taught me the old Lakota ways, while my German father showed me how to use modern tools. When I joined the Army as a young man, they made me a scout because I could track anything and move silent as a shadow. After my service, I came here to Blackwater Falls State Park. The deep woods and rushing water reminded me of the sacred places grandmother used to talk about. Most rangers work days, dealing with tourists and campfire permits. Me? I handle the night shift. When the sun goes down and normal people head inside, that's when I start work. My job is watching over the nocturnal animals, the bears, the wildcats, the wolves that sometimes drift down from Canada. I know their sounds, their tracks, their habits. After 20 years, there's not much that surprises me anymore, or so I thought. It was November 1982, and we had a new moon, the darkest kind of night you can get. The air was cold enough to see your breath, and the hemlock trees were so thick they blocked out what little starlight there was. Perfect conditions for my kind of work. But something felt different that night. Wrong. I was getting ready for my patrol when the radio crackled. Jenny Blackwater, our day shift supervisor, came in looking worried. Jenny was Seneca, knew these mountains better than anyone, and I'd never seen her rattled before. "Sam, we got problems," she said, setting down a stack of incident reports. 3 different camping groups called in the same story this week. They say there's a pack of wolves hunting them, but not like normal wolves. I picked up the reports and read them. The stories were similar but crazy. Campers talking about wolves that seemed to work together like a military unit. Wolves that set traps and used strategy. One family swore the pack leader walked on 2 legs sometimes. Probably just scared city folks, I said. You know how people get in the dark woods. Every shadow looks like a monster. Jenny shook her head. These aren't city people, Sam. 2 of the groups were experienced hikers. The third was a hunting party from Pennsylvania. Guys who know their way around wild animals. I studied the reports again. All 3 groups had been camping near the Blackwater River, close to the falls. The tracks they described were strange. Wolf paws, but walking in perfect formation, like soldiers marching. One report mentioned finding their gear moved around their campsite while they slept, arranged in ways that made no sense. I'll take a look tonight, I told Jenny. Probably just a pack that's learned to be smart around humans. Maybe some escaped zoo animals or wolf-dog hybrids. Jenny looked at me with those dark eyes of hers, and I saw something I'd never seen before. Fear. Sam, my grandmother told stories about these mountains. Old stories. About shadow wolves that hunt for more than just meat. I respected Jenny's knowledge, but I'd always been practical about such things. 20 years of night patrols had taught me that nature had its own mysteries without needing supernatural explanations. Still, her words stuck with me as I gathered my gear. I loaded up my truck with the usual supplies: night vision goggles, radio, first aid kit, flare gun, and my grandfather's rifle. The old Winchester had never failed me, and I figured if there really was a problem pack out there, it would handle anything I might face. The drive to Blackwater Falls took me through winding mountain roads. My headlights cut through darkness so complete it seemed solid. When I reached the parking area near the falls, I could hear the water roaring even from inside my truck. The sound echoed off the canyon walls in a way that made normal noises hard to identify. I strapped on my gear and started walking the trail toward the river. The night vision goggles turned everything green, but they let me see clearly in the pitch black. The forest felt empty, too empty. After 20 years of night patrols, I knew what the woods should sound like. There should have been owl calls, insects buzzing, small animals rustling in the underbrush. Instead, I heard nothing but the waterfall and my own footsteps on the trail. That's when I found the first tracks. The tracks were in soft mud beside the river, clear as day through my night vision. Wolf tracks, no doubt about it, but arranged in a pattern I'd never seen before. Instead of the usual random scatter you get from a hunting pack, these were in 2 perfect parallel lines, like the wolves had been walking in formation. I knelt down and studied them closer. The paw prints were larger than normal, bigger than any wolf tracks I'd seen in 20 years. But what really bothered me was how they were spaced. The stride was too long, like the animals had been moving on 2 legs sometimes instead of 4. I followed the tracks along the riverbank. They led upstream toward the falls, and the pattern never broke. Whatever had made these prints had kept perfect formation for over a quarter mile. No animal naturally moves that way. The sound of the waterfall got louder as I climbed the rocky path. Blackwater Falls drops 57 feet into a deep gorge, and the mist rises up like smoke in the cold air. The rocks were slippery, and I had to watch my footing. That's probably why I almost missed the first sign of real trouble. My night vision caught something pale in the green darkness. About 50 yards from the base of the falls, someone had built a shelter, branches and leaves arranged into a lean-to. But as I got closer, I realized it wasn't a shelter at all. It was a cage. The branches were woven together with strips of cloth torn from camping gear. Inside the cage, scattered across the ground, were personal items: a wallet, a wedding ring, a child's stuffed animal. The items were arranged in a careful pattern around what looked like the remains of a small fire. But there were no people. I checked my radio, but the signal was weak down in the gorge. The canyon walls blocked most transmissions, and I was on my own until I could climb back to higher ground. I took pictures with my camera and made notes about the location. That's when I heard the first howl. It came from somewhere upstream, beyond the falls. Not the usual wolf howl you hear in movies. This was deeper, almost like a human voice trying to sound like an animal. The sound bounced off the canyon walls and seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then another howl answered it, from a different direction. Then another. Within seconds, the whole gorge was filled with howling voices, and I realized I was surrounded. I drew my rifle and clicked off the safety. 20 years of ranger work had taught me that most animal problems could be solved by making yourself look big and making lots of noise. But something told me this situation was different. The howling stopped all at once, like someone had given a signal. The silence was worse than the noise. I could hear my own heartbeat and the sound of water dripping from the rocks. Then I saw the eyes. Green points of light in my night vision, scattered through the trees on both sides of the canyon. But as I watched, the green turned to red, hot spots that my thermal imaging picked up as body heat. The eyes were positioned too high off the ground for normal wolves, and they moved with purpose, not the random motion of wild animals. I counted at least 8 pairs of eyes, forming a rough circle around my position. They weren't moving closer, just watching, waiting. I started backing toward the trail that led up out of the gorge, keeping my rifle ready. The eyes followed my movement but kept their distance. It was like being studied by something intelligent, something that was deciding what to do with me. That's when I found the first body. He was wedged between 2 rocks about 10 feet from the trail, still wearing his hiking boots and backpack. The park ID in his wallet said his name was Marcus Webb, age 34, from Pittsburgh. He'd been reported missing 3 days ago. The cause of death was obvious: massive trauma to the neck and chest, consistent with large animal attack. But what bothered me was the condition of the body. It hadn't been eaten. In fact, it looked like it had been carefully positioned between the rocks, almost like it was being displayed. I radioed for backup, but still got nothing but static. I was at least an hour's hike from the nearest road, and my truck radio had better range than the portable unit. I needed to get out of the canyon and call for help, but the eyes had moved. They were now positioned between me and the trail out. I was trapped. I fired a shot into the air, hoping the noise would scare them off. The sound echoed through the canyon like thunder. For a moment, nothing happened. Then I heard something that made my blood freeze. Laughter. Not human laughter, but not entirely animal either. It came from the same directions as the eyes, and it sounded like whatever was out there found my predicament amusing. I started moving toward the trail anyway, rifle raised and ready. If I was going to die in this canyon, I wasn't going to make it easy. That's when they stepped into view. The first one came out of the shadows near the base of the falls. In my night vision, it looked like a massive wolf, easily twice the size of any I'd ever seen. But it was standing on its back legs like a man, and its front paws looked almost like hands with claws. Then the others appeared. 8 wolves, all standing upright, all staring at me with those red-hot eyes. They formed a perfect semicircle, blocking my escape route. But they weren't attacking. They were studying me like they were trying to figure out what I was. The largest one, clearly the pack leader, took a step forward. When it moved, I could see that it wasn't entirely wolf anymore. The body was wrong. Too long, too thin, with joints that bent in directions that shouldn't be possible. The head was wolf-like, but the eyes had human intelligence behind them. It spoke. "You are the one who sees in darkness," it said in a voice that sounded like gravel mixed with wind. "The one they call Night Wolf." My hands were shaking as I kept the rifle trained on it. In 20 years of ranger work, I'd dealt with bears, wildcats, even a few escaped exotic animals, but I'd never had an animal talk to me before. "What are you?" I managed to say. "We are what your people created," the thing replied. "Your Lakota grandmother told stories, yes? About the price of dark magic?" I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the November air. Grandmother had told stories about shamans who traded their humanity for power, who could take animal form but lost their souls in the process. I'd always thought they were just stories. "The Seneca knew us first," the creature continued, "called us shadow wolves. But we have been sleeping for many years, waiting for the right time to hunt again." The other wolves began moving, spreading out to surround me completely. They moved with coordination that was definitely human, but their grace was purely animal. Whatever they had been once, they weren't anymore. "What do you want?" I asked. The leader smiled, showing teeth that were far too large and sharp for any natural animal. "Souls," it said. "We collect them. The more we take, the stronger we become. And you, Night Wolf, have a particularly bright soul." That's when I noticed something that made my situation even worse. Around the neck of each wolf, barely visible in the darkness, was a collar made of human finger bones, fresh ones. "The campers," I said. "Food for the body, souls for the spirit," the leader confirmed. "We have been feeding well since we awakened, but we are still hungry." I counted my ammunition, 6 shots left in the rifle, plus a full clip in my pistol. Even if every shot was perfect, there were too many of them. I needed a different strategy. "You said I have a bright soul," I said, playing for time. "What does that mean?" "You walk between two worlds, like we do," the leader explained. "Your grandmother's blood gives you power you have never used. We can teach you to embrace it. Join you mean. Transform. Become what you were meant to be. The alternative is death." I thought about Jenny's warning, about the old stories. In those tales, there was always a way to fight dark magic, but it required sacrifice. Sometimes the ultimate sacrifice. "Let me think about it," I said. The leader laughed that horrible, not quite human sound again. "Think quickly. Dawn is still hours away and we grow impatient." That's when I made my first mistake. I lowered the rifle slightly, pretending to consider their offer. The moment I did, 2 of the smaller wolves rushed me from the sides. I got 1 shot off, hitting the first attacker center mass. It screamed and fell, but the wound closed almost immediately and it got back up. The second one hit me like a freight train, knocking me backward into the rocks. Pain shot through my shoulder as claws raked across my jacket, but the thick leather held. I rolled away and came up firing, putting 3 more shots into the attacking wolf. This time it stayed down, but I could see the wounds already starting to heal. "Regular bullets won't kill us, Night Wolf," the leader said. "We are beyond such simple death." I was down to 2 shots, and they knew it. The circle began closing in. That's when I remembered something else from grandmother. Anna's stories. Silver could hurt spirits, but there was something more basic, more primal. Fire. Purifying flame could destroy anything touched by dark magic. I still had the flare gun. "Wait," I called out, raising my free hand. "I want to make a deal." The leader held up one clawed hand, and the others stopped moving. "What kind of deal?" "You want souls, right? I know where you can get a lot more than just mine." The creature's eyes narrowed with interest. "Explain." "There's a scout group coming through tomorrow night. 30 kids plus adult leaders. All camping right here by the falls. Easy targets." The leader's smile grew wider, showing more of those terrible teeth. "You would sacrifice children to save yourself?" "I would do whatever it takes to survive," I lied. The truth was there was no scout group. But I needed them to believe there was, needed them to think I was the kind of person who would trade innocent lives for my own. It was the only way to get them close enough for what I had planned. "Very good," the leader said. "Perhaps you understand power after all. Show us this group." "They're supposed to make camp up on the ridge about a mile from here," I said, pointing toward the trail out of the canyon. "But I'll need to guide you. The trail's tricky in the dark." The leader considered this, then nodded to the others. They fell into formation behind us as we started up the trail. I kept the flare gun hidden under my jacket, waiting for the right moment. We were halfway up the canyon wall when I made my move. I spun around and fired the flare directly into the face of the pack leader. The magnesium burned white-hot against his skull, and for the first time, I heard him scream in genuine pain. The smell of burning fur and flesh filled the air, but instead of falling, he just got angry. "You think fire will stop us?" he roared, his voice now fully inhuman. "We are beyond such weak magic." The flare had burned away part of his face, revealing the skull underneath. But even as I watched, the flesh began growing back, healing itself with unnatural speed. I ran. The trail up the canyon wall was steep and rocky, but I knew it better than they did. 20 years of night patrols had taught me every root and stone. Behind me, I could hear them coming, not the normal sound of animals running, but something worse. The sound of claws scraping on rock, of bodies that moved in ways that defied physics. I reached the top of the canyon just as my radio started working again. I keyed the microphone and shouted into it. Jenny, come in. I need backup at Blackwater Falls. I need backup now." Her voice crackled through the static. "Sam, what's wrong?" "Bring everything we've got. And Jenny, bring sage. Lots of sage." "Sage. Sam, what's happening down there?" Before I could answer, something hit me from behind and sent me rolling across the rocky ground. One of the wolves had caught up to me, and it was no longer bothering to look human. Its body had stretched and twisted into something out of a nightmare, still wolf-like but wrong in every proportion. I pulled out my pistol and emptied the entire clip into it. The bullet slowed it down but didn't stop it. Each wound healed within seconds. "You cannot kill what is already dead, Night Wolf," the pack leader said, emerging from the trail with the others behind him. "We died long ago when we first tasted dark magic. Now we exist between life and death, sustained by the souls we harvest." They had me surrounded again, but this time I was on flat ground with room to maneuver. More importantly, I was close to my truck and the emergency supplies I kept there. "You want to know about real magic?" I said, backing toward the vehicle. "Let me show you what my grandmother taught me." In the truck's storage compartment, I had a bundle of white sage that Jenny had given me years ago. She'd said it was for ceremonial purposes to cleanse negative energy. I'd never realized. I believed in such things, but I'd kept it anyway out of respect for her traditions. Now it might be the only thing that could save my life. I grabbed the sage bundle and my emergency lighter. As I lit it, the smoke began rising in thick white clouds. The effect on the wolves was immediate. They backed away, snarling and covering their faces. "Purification smoke," I said, understanding finally dawning on me. "It burns away spiritual contamination, doesn't it?" The pack leader's eyes were now filled with something I hadn't seen before, fear. "You do not understand what you are doing," he said. "We offer you power beyond imagination. We offer you immortality." "You offer corruption," I replied, advancing with the smoking sage. "My grandmother always said the spirits of the earth could cleanse any darkness. I guess it's time to find out if she was right." I began singing one of the old Lakota purification songs, the words coming back to me from childhood. The smoke grew thicker, and the wolves began to howl in pain. But instead of backing away further, they seemed to be changing. Their wolf forms were dissolving, revealing what lay underneath. Human faces, twisted with pain and madness. Men and women who had once been normal people, corrupted by the same dark magic that had created their leader. "Help us," one of them whispered, no longer snarling but pleading. "We remember now. We remember who we were." The pack leader was changing too, but fighting it. His wolf form flickered like a bad television signal, sometimes showing a human face underneath. A Seneca man with traditional tattoos and desperate eyes. "I was a shaman once," he said, his voice now fully human. "I wanted to protect my people from the white man's diseases, from the soldiers who came to steal our land. I made a deal with dark spirits. I traded my humanity for the power to become a wolf, to hunt our enemies." "But the power corrupted you," I said, understanding. "Yes, the hunger grew. First we hunted soldiers, then settlers, then anyone who entered our territory. We could not stop. And when we died, the dark spirits would not let us rest. They bound our souls to this place, forced us to keep hunting, keep feeding them the souls of the innocent." The sage smoke was growing thicker, and I could see the other transformed humans more clearly now. Some were recent, probably the missing campers. Others looked older, their faces bearing the marks of different time periods. This had been going on for generations. "Can you be freed?" I asked. "Only if the spiritual bond is broken," he said. "Only if someone with the right knowledge performs the proper rituals." I looked at the faces of the people trapped in wolf form, saw the hope in their eyes. But I also saw something else in the pack leader's expression: cunning. Even in his moment of apparent redemption, he was planning something. That's when I realized my mistake. The sage was purifying the corruption, yes, but it was also making them more powerful by clarifying their spiritual energy. The pack leader's human form was stronger than his wolf form had been. "Thank you, Night Wolf," he said, and his human shape began to grow larger, more imposing. "You have freed us from the confusion of our beast forms. Now we can hunt with human intelligence and supernatural power." He gestured, and the other transformed humans began changing too. But instead of becoming more human, they were becoming something worse. Human minds with the predatory instincts of wolves, all of their spiritual energy focused and enhanced. I had made things worse, not better. That's when the cavalry arrived. Jenny's truck came roaring up the mountain road with its emergency lights flashing. She jumped out before it had fully stopped, carrying a bundle of supplies and what looked like a traditional Seneca medicine bag. "Sam," she called, "get down." I hit the dirt just as she threw something into the air above the transformed pack. It exploded into a cloud of different colored powders: red, yellow, white, and black. The effect was immediate and dramatic. The pack leader screamed as the colored powders settled on his skin. Where they touched, his flesh began to smoke and burn. The others were affected the same way, their enhanced forms dissolving back into confused, frightened human shapes. "Sacred cornmeal," Jenny explained, still throwing handfuls of the powder. "Blessed by 7 different medicine men from 7 different tribes. It binds dark spirits and forces them back to the shadow realm where they belong." But the pack leader wasn't finished yet. Even as the cornmeal burned his spiritual form, he was gathering his remaining power for one last attack. His human shape began to glow with a sick, greenish light. "If I cannot have your souls," he said, "then I will drag you both into darkness with me." The ground around us began to crack and smoke. I could feel heat rising from below, and the smell of sulfur filled the air. He was opening some kind of gateway, trying to pull us down into whatever realm the dark spirits inhabited. "Jenny, what do we do?" I shouted over the sound of splitting rock. "Trust your grandmother's teachings," she shouted back. "You know what to do." I thought about the old stories, about the songs and ceremonies I'd learned as a child. There was one ritual I remembered, something about closing spiritual doorways and sending corrupted souls to their proper rest. I began to sing again, but this time I sang the death song, the Lakota chant that helps spirits find their way to the afterlife. Jenny joined in with the Seneca version, her voice harmonizing with mine. The effect was powerful. The cracked ground began to heal itself, and the gateway the pack leader had opened started to close. The other transformed humans, freed from his control, began to glow with a gentle white light. "Thank you," the woman who had been a wolf said to me. "We can rest now." One by one, they faded away, their souls finally freed to move on to whatever came next. The pack leader was the last to go, his form growing smaller and more transparent as our death songs grew stronger. "This is not over, Night Wolf," he said with his final breath. "There are others like me, other shamans who made the same choice I did. They will come for you now that you have shown them what you can do." Then he was gone, and the mountain was quiet again. Jenny and I sat on the ground, exhausted from the spiritual battle. The eastern sky was just beginning to show the first hints of dawn. "How did you know what to bring?" I asked her. "My grandmother told me the same stories yours did," she said. "And when you radioed for Sage, I knew what we were dealing with. I've been carrying those supplies for 20 years, hoping I'd never need to use them." We spent the next hour collecting evidence and preparing our report. Officially, we would say that a rabid wolf pack had attacked several campers, and that we had been forced to destroy the animals for public safety. The missing campers would be listed as victims of animal attacks. Unofficially, we both knew the truth was much stranger and more dangerous. As I drove home that morning, I thought about the pack leader's final words. There were others out there, other corrupted shamans using dark magic, other spirits that fed on human souls, and somehow my actions tonight had put me on their radar. Jenny was right about one thing. The old stories weren't just stories. They were warnings about real dangers that most people had forgotten existed. But some of us remembered, and some of us were willing to stand guard against the darkness. My name is Samuel Running Bear, and I've been a park ranger for 20 years. But after that night at Blackwater Falls, I understood that my real job was just beginning. The night shift isn't just about watching over animals anymore. It's about watching for the things that shouldn't exist but do and highway. The things that hunt in the darkness, looking for souls to steal and lives to destroy. Most people sleep safely at night because they don't know what's out there. But some of us stay awake, keeping watch, making sure the shadows don't get too bold. The hunt never really ends. It just changes who's doing the hunting. And sometimes if you're very quiet and you listen carefully on a dark night near Blackwater Falls, you can still hear howling in the distance. Different voices now, but still hunting, still hungry, still waiting for someone foolish enough to walk alone in the dark. But that's a story for another night. My name is Jonathan Whitehawk, but everyone calls me Stone Walker. Been a park ranger for 17 years now, working the highest peak in Virginia, Mount Rogers, standing tall at 5,729 feet. Most folks think being a ranger means sitting around watching trees grow, but they're wrong, real wrong. I got Cherokee blood from my mama's side and Welsh from my daddy. The Cherokee name means White Hawk Soaring, which my grandmother always said was fitting since I spend most of my time up high, looking down on the world. I was a geologist before I took this job, so I know rocks. I know how they're made, how they break, how they move. What I didn't know was that sometimes they can scream. Mount Rogers ain't like other mountains. It's got these big open spaces called balds, just grass and rocks with no trees, like someone took a giant razor and shaved the mountaintop clean. Wild ponies run free up there, tough little things that can handle the weather better than most people. The Cherokee folks always said this place was special, that something powerful sleeps in the mountain's heart. I always figured that was just old stories. I was wrong about that too. It started in June 1975, right around the summer solstice. That's when the mountain gets the most light, and something about that seemed to wake things up. The ponies started acting strange first, wouldn't go near certain spots, kept looking up at the rocks like they were watching something move. But rocks don't move, not unless there's an earthquake or a landslide. I checked all my equipment. Everything looked normal. Then the hikers started coming down with stories. "Ranger, that mountain's making noise," said Mrs. Peterson, a regular visitor who'd been hiking these trails for 20 years. "Sounds like someone crying, but real loud, real sad." I figured it was wind through the rocks. Mount Rogers gets some fierce weather. Storms come up fast and hit hard when you're that high up. But when 3 more groups came down saying the same thing, I started paying attention. These weren't city folks who jump at every owl hoot. These were experienced hikers who knew mountain sounds. So I loaded up my gear and headed up to investigate. I brought my seismic equipment, the same stuff geologists use to measure earthquakes. If something was making noise in that mountain, I'd find out what it was. I also packed my Cherokee grandmother's medicine bundle, though I told myself that was just for luck. The hike up took 2 hours, winding through pine forest that smelled like Christmas morning, then breaking out onto the open balds where the wind hits you like a slap. The ponies were nowhere to be seen, which was strange. Usually they're scattered all over the high meadows, but today the mountain felt empty. Too empty. I set up my equipment near the highest point where the rocks jut out like broken teeth. The seismograph started recording right away, picking up vibrations I couldn't feel with my feet. But the readings didn't make sense. Instead of random earthquake patterns, the lines on my screen showed something regular, like breathing. Like the mountain was taking big, slow breaths every 90 seconds. That's when I heard it for the first time, a low moan that seemed to come from everywhere at once. It rolled up through the rocks under my feet, traveled through the air, and settled in my chest like a weight. It wasn't wind. It wasn't an animal. It was something else entirely, something that made every hair on my body stand up straight. I'm a scientific man. I believe in facts and evidence. But standing on that mountaintop with my grandmother's medicine bundle getting warm against my chest and that impossible sound filling the air, I started thinking maybe some old stories aren't just stories after all. The moaning came again 3 minutes later, right on schedule. I timed it with my watch, every 90 seconds like clockwork. The seismograph needle jumped each time, showing vibrations coming from deep underground, maybe a mile down or more. No natural process could make sounds that regular, that deep, that sad. I packed up my equipment and started searching the mountain more carefully, looking for cracks or openings that might explain the noise. The Cherokee side of my family always said I had sharp eyes for finding what others missed. After an hour of searching, I found something that made my blood run cold. There was a hole in the rocks that I'd never seen before. Perfect circle, maybe 4 feet across, dropping down into darkness so deep my flashlight beam just disappeared. I'd been working this mountain for 17 years, knew every boulder and crevice. This hole hadn't been here last month when I did my regular survey. I dropped a rock down the opening and waited. Never heard it hit bottom. The next morning, I called Mary Thunderheart, a Cherokee elder who sometimes helped the Park Service with historical questions. Mary knew more about these mountains than anyone alive, and she never talked nonsense. "Stonewalker," she said when I described what I'd found, "you need to stay away from that place." "Why? What do you think it is?" "I think you found something that was supposed to stay lost." Her voice got quiet. "My grandfather told stories about Mount Rogers. Said the old Cherokee sealed something dangerous in that mountain, something that controlled thunder and lightning. They used sacred ceremonies to keep it sleeping." I tried to laugh it off. "Come on, Mary. You know I respect the old ways, but this is probably just a sinkhole or a cave system opening up." "Then explain the sound," she said. "My grandfather called it the thunder being. Said if it ever woke up, it would bring storms that could destroy everything from here to the ocean." I hung up the phone feeling uneasy, but still convinced there had to be a scientific explanation. Maybe underground water or gas escaping from deep rock formations. I decided to go back up with better equipment, rope, powerful lights, and gas detectors. If this was just a natural cave system, I'd prove it. The ponies were back when I reached the summit, but they stayed far away from the circular opening. Every time the moaning sound came, they would lift their heads and take a step back, like they were listening to something that scared them. Animals have instincts we've lost. Maybe I should have listened to what they were trying to tell me. I set up my rope system and rappelled into the hole. 20 feet down, my light hit the sides, and I nearly dropped my flashlight. The walls weren't natural rock formation. They were covered in carved symbols, spirals and lightning bolts and strange geometric patterns that hurt to look at for too long. The carving work was incredible, like someone had spent years making every line perfect. But that wasn't the strangest part. The symbols seemed to glow with their own faint light, barely visible but definitely there. And they were moving. Not physically, but the patterns seemed to shift and change when I wasn't looking directly at them. 40 feet down, I found a ledge and stepped onto solid ground. I was in a huge underground chamber, bigger than anything that should exist inside Mount Rogers. My light beam couldn't reach the ceiling or the far walls. The air felt thick and electric, like right before a thunderstorm hits. That's when I realized the moaning wasn't coming from above me anymore. It was coming from deeper in the cave, somewhere ahead in the darkness, and it sounded like it was getting closer. I should have climbed back up right then, should have sealed that hole and called it a day. But I'm Cherokee and Welsh, which means I'm too stubborn and curious for my own good. I started walking toward the sound, my light beam cutting through air that seemed to get thicker with each step. The chamber stretched on forever, filled with more carved walls and strange rock formations that looked almost like furniture made for giants. In the center of it all, I found what I was looking for. And what I found changed everything I thought I knew about the world. There was something sleeping in the heart of Mount Rogers, something huge and old and powerful, wrapped in chains made of the same carved stone as the walls. The chains glowed brighter than the symbols, pulsing with each breath the creature took, because it was breathing. The whole mountain was breathing along with whatever was sleeping down there in the dark. I understood then why the Cherokee had sealed this place. Some things are too dangerous to let loose in the world. But I also understood something else. The chains were starting to crack. I ran. Not proud of it, but when you see something that shouldn't exist, sometimes running is the smart choice. I climbed that rope faster than I'd ever climbed anything, got back to my truck, and drove straight to the ranger station. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the steering wheel. But I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. The creature in the chains wasn't just sleeping. It was dreaming. And its dreams were starting to leak out into the real world. Over the next 3 days, things got worse. The weather went crazy. Lightning storms with no rain, sudden temperature drops that froze morning dew even though it was June. The seismic equipment I'd left up on the mountain recorded earthquake patterns that made no sense, like something huge was rolling over in its sleep. And the hole was getting bigger. I went back up with Mary Thunderheart, against my better judgment. She took one look at the opening and sat down hard on a rock, like someone had knocked the wind out of her. "It's starting to wake up," she whispered. "Stone Walker, we have to do something. The old bindings are failing." "What kind of bindings?" "Sacred mathematics. Star patterns." The Cherokee who imprisoned this thing were master builders. They knew how to use the mountain itself as a cage. But that was 300 years ago. Things change. The mountain shifts. And modern technology. She looked at my electronic equipment. All these radio waves and electrical signals are interfering with the sacred patterns. As if to prove her point, my radio started crackling with static, then began broadcasting voices speaking in a language I didn't recognize. Old words that seemed to make the air itself vibrate. "That's Cherokee," Mary said, but her face had gone pale. "Ancient Cherokee, older than any of our current dialects. It's trying to communicate." The static cleared for a moment, and a voice spoke in perfect English. "The metal birds sing too loudly. The earth shakes with unnatural rhythms. I stir. I wake. I remember hunger." My radio went dead. Every piece of electronic equipment I'd brought stopped working at the same instant. We were alone on the mountain with something that was definitely not sleeping anymore. "We need to get everyone off this mountain," I told Mary. "Close the whole area, evacuate the campgrounds." "That won't help," she replied. "If the thunder being fully awakens, it won't stop at the mountain. It will bring storms to the entire region. My grandfather said it once rained lightning for 3 days straight when the being was angry." The ground shook under our feet. Not an earthquake, but something moving deep inside the mountain. The circular hole cracked wider, splitting the rock with sounds like gunshots. Hot air rushed out, carrying the smell of ozone and something else, something like copper and burnt things. "There might be a way," Mary said slowly. "The original binding ceremony. If we can remember the right words, the right patterns, maybe we can repair the sacred chains. You know how to do that?" "Some of it, but it requires someone with Cherokee blood to anchor the ceremony, someone the Thunder being will recognize as kin, not enemy." She looked at me meaningfully. "Someone it might listen to, instead of just crushing." I stared down into that growing hole, watching weird lights flicker in the depths. Somewhere down there, something ancient and powerful was testing its strength against chains that had held it for 3 centuries. The smart thing would be to call in the National Guard, or the Army, or whoever handles situations like this. But I don't think there's a military manual for dealing with Cherokee Thunder beings. "What do I have to do?" I asked. Mary smiled, but it wasn't a happy expression. "You have to go back down there, face to face. The binding ceremony has to be performed in the creature's presence, and it has to be voluntary. You can't force a Thunder being to sleep. You have to convince it." The mountain shook again, harder this time. Cracks appeared in the rocks around us, and I could hear something that sounded like chains breaking in the distance. "How long do we have?" "Not long," Mary said. "Maybe hours, maybe minutes. But Stone Walker, once you go down there, you might not come back up. The Thunder being has been asleep for 300 years. It's going to be confused, angry, hungry. and you're going to be standing right in front of it when it fully wakes up. I thought about all the people in the valleys below Mount Rogers. Families, kids, old folks who couldn't run if supernatural storms started tearing up the countryside. I thought about my responsibility as a ranger to protect people from natural dangers. I guess this counted as a natural danger, even if it was the kind of natural that most people didn't believe in. "Tell me about the ceremony," I said. Going back down into that hole was the hardest thing I'd ever done. The opening had cracked wider, and strange lights pulsed from deep underground like a giant heartbeat. Mary had taught me the Cherokee words I'd need to speak, made me repeat them until I could say them in my sleep. But knowing the words and actually facing a thunder being were two different things entirely. The carved symbols on the walls were glowing brighter now, moving faster, like they were excited about something. I rappelled down into air that felt electric against my skin, making my teeth ache and my hair stand on end. Every breath tasted like metal and storm clouds. The underground chamber had changed. What had seemed impossibly large before now felt smaller, like something huge was taking up more space. The stone chains I'd seen wrapped around the sleeping creature were cracked and sparking, throwing off blue-white light that hurt to look at directly. And the thunder being was awake. I've tried to describe it to people since then, but words don't really work. Imagine lightning that decided to have a body. Imagine a storm that learned to think. It was roughly human-shaped but 20 feet tall, made of crackling energy and muscle, and something that might have been feathers if feathers could be made of pure electricity. Its eyes were like looking into the heart of a tornado, constantly moving, full of power that could tear the world apart if it wanted to. When it saw me, it stopped straining against the chains and tilted its massive head like a curious bird. "Cherokee blood," it said, and its voice was thunder rolling across the sky. "But also the blood of the boat people. Interesting. It has been very long since I spoke with the two-legged ones." "You've been sleeping," I said, proud that my voice only shook a little. "For 300 years. Sleeping, yes. Dreaming of sky and storm and the wild freedom of the clouds. But your kind has made the earth noisy with your metal songs and lightning roads. You have woken me with your constant buzzing." The thunder being tested its chains again, and several more links cracked. The whole mountain groaned like it was in peal. "Fine. I am hungry," it continued. "Hungry for open sky and the taste of rain. Hungry to dance with tornadoes and sing with the wind. These stone ropes have held me too long." "The Cherokee bound you for a reason," I said, taking a careful step closer. "You were hurting people." The creature's eyes flashed brighter. "I was living. I am storm-made flesh, wind-given thought, to fly and rage and rain down lightning. This is my nature. Your ancestors imprisoned me for being what I am." "They imprisoned you because you wouldn't share the sky," Mary's voice echoed from above. She had followed me down, carrying a bundle of sage and something that looked like very old bones. "My grandfather's stories say you brought drought when you were angry, floods when you were sad. You nearly destroyed all the Cherokee settlements in this region. The two-legged ones needed to learn respect for the sky powers. And now we have," I said, which was a lie. But sometimes lies are necessary. "We've learned. We know the sky belongs to forces greater than us. But if you break free now, in this time, you'll destroy millions of people who never hurt you." The thunder being considered this, its form shifting and crackling. "Millions? The world has changed while you slept. There are cities now with more people than all the Cherokee who ever lived, children who've never seen a real storm. If you bring your full power to bear, they won't know how to protect themselves. Perhaps they should learn, as your ancestors did." The chains cracked further. I could see daylight coming through new splits in the cave ceiling. The thunder being was breaking free, whether I convinced it or not. "There's another way," Mary called out. "The old agreement. The Cherokee can offer you something better than random destruction." "Speak," the thunder being rumbled. "Partnership," she said. "Controlled storms when they're needed. Rain for crops, wind for power, lightning to clear the dead wood from forests. Work with us instead of against us." I saw the thunder being's expression change, saw interest flies. In those tornado eyes. You would trust me with such things? After your ancestors chained me in stone and darkness? We would trust you if you proved trustworthy, I said. But that means accepting limits, accepting that your power has to be balanced against other needs. The creature was quiet for a long moment, and in that silence I could hear the mountain settling around us, adjusting to the massive presence at its heart. And if I refuse? If I choose freedom over partnership? I looked up at Mary, who nodded and began chanting in Cherokee, words that seemed to make the cave walls glow brighter. Then we repair the chains, I said. Reinforce them with new ceremonies, new bindings, and you sleep for another 300 years. You think you have the power to force such sleep upon me? I think I have Cherokee blood and the authority of someone who spent 17 years protecting this mountain. I think the spirits of this place will listen to me if I ask them properly. The thunder being laughed, and it was like hearing a summer storm celebrate. Bold words, Stonewalker. Very well. I will accept your partnership, your controlled storms, and limited freedom. But know this, if your people betray this agreement, if they try to cage me again through trickery, I will bring such weather as has never been seen, lightning that burns for days, winds that tear cities from their foundations. Understood, I said. Then let us seal this bargain properly. The thunder being reached out one massive hand, sparking with electricity, and touched my forehead. For a moment I was flying through clouds, seeing the world from the perspective of a hurricane, feeling the incredible joy of controlling wind and rain and lightning. Then I was back in the cave, dizzy but unharmed. It is done, the creature said. The sacred partnership is renewed. I will sleep again, but lightly. Call upon me when you need storms and I will answer. But remember, Stonewalker, I am thunder made flesh. Respect my power or face my wrath. The chains began glowing brighter, but now they looked less like imprisonment and more like jewelry. The thunder being settled back into its resting position, already beginning to fade back into dormancy. Sleep well, I whispered. Until the storm's call, it replied. And then there was only silence and the faint sound of wind through stone. We sealed the opening in Mount Rogers with concrete and steel, then covered it with natural-looking rocks so it wouldn't attract attention. The official report blamed the seismic activity on unusual underground gas formations and natural settling of geological structures. Nobody questioned it. People believe what makes sense to them, and ancient Cherokee thunder beings don't make sense to most folks. But I know better now. I know there are things sleeping in the old mountains, things that were old when the Cherokee first came to these hills. And I know that sometimes the old agreements need to be renewed by people willing to stand between the modern world and powers that could tear it apart. The weather patterns changed after that summer. Nothing dramatic, just better rain distribution, fewer destructive storms, lightning that seemed more precise about where it struck. Farmers in the region started having better crops. Forest fires burned themselves out instead of raging for weeks. Meteorologists called it a beneficial shift in regional climate patterns. I became something more than just a park ranger. Mary Thunderheart taught me about other sites in the Appalachian range, places where the Cherokee had made agreements with forces beyond normal understanding, mountains that held sleeping things, valleys where spirits still walked, rivers that remembered their own sacred names. I started spending my off-duty time checking these places, making sure modern development wasn't disturbing things that needed to stay peaceful. It's not an easy job. Every year there are more radio towers, more cell phone signals, more electromagnetic interference that can disrupt the old bindings. Urban sprawl creeps closer to sacred sites. Developers want to build resorts on mountains that should never be disturbed, but it's necessary work. Because I've seen what happens when something ancient and powerful wakes up confused and angry. I've felt the touch of a thunder being's mind, experienced the terrible joy of controlling natural forces that could reshape the landscape in minutes. The Cherokee were right to make those old agreements, and someone has to make sure those agreements are kept. So now, when hikers come down from Mount Rogers talking about strange sounds or weird lights, I listen carefully. When my seismic equipment picks up unusual readings, I investigate personally. When the wild ponies start acting nervous, I pay attention. Because I'm Jonathan Stonewalker Whitehawk, and I'm the guardian of things that sleep in mountains. I know the thunder being is dreaming again, waiting for the next time it needs to bring controlled storms to help the land. And I know that as long as we keep our side of the bargain, it will keep sleeping peacefully. But I also know there are other things in other mountains, other agreements that might need renewing someday. The Cherokee were master negotiators with forces beyond normal understanding. They knew how to make deals that lasted centuries. I'm learning to be worthy of that knowledge, and every time storm clouds gather over Mount Rogers, I listen carefully to the thunder, waiting to hear if the thunder being is calling my name. Because that's what guardians do. We answer when the old powers need us, and we make sure the agreements that protect everyone are honored. Some people think I'm just a park ranger who's been alone in the woods too long. They think I'm telling tall tales about ancient Cherokee magic and creatures made of lightning. They're welcome to believe that. It makes my job easier. But if you're ever hiking in the high Appalachians and you hear sounds that don't quite make sense, or see lights where no lights should be, or feel like the mountain itself is watching you, remember that some places are sacred, some agreements are older than our civilization, and some guardians take their promises very seriously. The thunder being sleeps again in the heart of Mount Rogers, but it sleeps lightly, and it dreams of storms yet to come. And I'll be there to listen when it calls, because that's what I promised to do. That's what Stonewalker does. I walk between the world of stone and the world of spirit, keeping the old agreements alive for as long as the mountains stand. And the mountains, as anyone in Cherokee country will tell you, have been here a very long time.